Hi everyone. Good to see you on my channel today. Today I will tell you a wonderful story. It is full of love and kindness. I hope you enjoy it and I wish you an enjoyable viewing experience. Thank you.
Part 1. Shintef. Your Honor, I submit that my client could not have known about the consequences of his decision and accordingly is not obliged to answer for them. Undoubtedly, he grossly violated all possible official instructions. He admits his guilt and agrees to be punished in accordance with the law. But for what happened to the victim, only those who committed this terrible crime should be held responsible. The judge looked at the lawyer. Her face was completely impassive, a professional habit. In her soul there was a real storm of emotions, incomprehension, surprise, and even contempt. She had seen and heard a lot of things in her long career, but this was the first time she had encountered such a horrifying case. And it was the lawyer who stood before her completely calm and uttered such things in complete seriousness. Who knows what is going on in her soul? Maybe the expression on her face, and this strange tone is also just a professional mask. But she might not have taken the case. She knew exactly who she had to protect. And she's still a woman. The judge thought irritably, can you really be so calm as to help a man who has condemned his own wife to terrible suffering? For what? For money? How much, I wonder, were you paid to so successfully suppress the disgust that must invariably arise at the mere sight of your client? So you're saying, the prosecutor interjected, temporarily saving the judge from having to react in any way to the lawyer's words, that your client could not have known what would happen to his wife if he sent her to a cell with 4 men convicted of serious, and especially serious offenses, to 4 men who had not seen a woman for years, and who were not in the habit of treating them with ceremony. What did he expect in such a case? That they would talk politely to the victim. My client, said the lawyer, acted in a highly unstable emotional state. He was unable to think rationally or predict the consequences of his actions. So let me remind you that immediately before he committed the acts, for which he is being tried here, he received irrefutable evidence that his wife had been unfaithful to him for many years. And do you think that's reason enough to inflict grievous bodily harm on her, albeit not with his own hands? As you can see, the victim is not even present at this hearing. Do you know why? Because she's still in a coma, and it's unclear if she'll ever come out of it. And all of this is a consequence of your client's emotional instability. And since that instability has such dire consequences, don't you think he should be isolated from society? Your Honor, I object. What does it matter what I think or don't think? I'm talking to Mr. Prosecutor in the language of facts. Instead, he's trying to influence this honorable court with some emotional arguments. Objection sustained. The judge reluctantly said, Mr. Prosecutor, please use facts, not your own emotions and speculations. I have to, she added mentally. Then I will also point out that this emotional instability, said the prosecutor, to which the defense counsel refers, is also not a proven fact. Moreover, the fact that on the day of the offense the video surveillance was switched off in the cell of interest refutes the idea that the defendant was acting in a state of affect. That seems to be the idea that the honorable counsel is trying to lead us to. The sect fee system failed, not deliberately switched off, just a tragic coincidence. And we only know this from the defendant's own words. There's no evidence. The judge wanted to sit back and close her eyes, but of course she couldn't allow herself to do that. Nevertheless, she listened half-heartedly to the argument. This was not the first hearing on this case, and it must not be the last. It was unlikely that either side would have anything new to say. In fact, the case was already decided. But the defense counsel persistently did everything she could to delay the verdict. She asked for postponement of hearings for some, quite probably, far-fetched reasons, demanded more and more new expertise. She found some dubious witnesses, Either she really believed in the possibility of getting what she wanted, or just delayed the inevitable. And the picture of what happened from the beginning looked clear enough. The defendant, Winston, was the warden of one of the far northern colonies. It was a zone of the category of those with the most incorrigible villains, maniacs, murderers, rapists, most of them recidivists, were imprisoned, and there were frequent violations in this colony. There were known cases of both torture of prisoners and, on the contrary, some kind of relaxation for them. It was quite evident that Winston had established in the institution entrusted to him some orders of his own, which had little to do with the law. Those who followed were rewarded. Those who did not follow were punished. These facts didn't just surface from time to time, and then somehow they were hushed up. By and large, nobody was hiding anything. Nobody cared much about what was going on in some colony in the far north, as long as the prisoners stayed inside it, away from society and normal people. Of course, sooner or later, such connivance was bound to lead to tragedy, and it did. Winston must have felt complete impunity. Repeatedly, he had broken all sorts of laws and regulations without being held accountable, and apparently he thought that was the way it would always be. On the day of the tragedy, the head of the colony, he claimed, had received some information about his wife's infidelity. They were mailed to him, a letter and some supporting photographs. In a fit of rage, Winston claimed he threw it all into the furnace fire, so there was no way to prove or disprove the contents of the letter. Nevertheless, some letter did exist. The defendant received it on the morning of the same ill-fated day. This was confirmed by the postman, and it was listed in the postal databases. Who sent it? That was not entirely clear. This man left no name or return address. It was simply delivered to one of the post offices in the nearest town to the colony. Of course, if necessary, one could try to find this mysterious sender. The investigators, however, did not pursue it, believing that he had nothing to do with the case. Theoretically, he could have helped bolster the defense case. But that was the lawyer's concern, not the law enforcement agencies. After all, finding this mysterious man was unlikely to make a difference. Maybe he had indeed sent Winston a message that his wife was cheating on him, but he had absolutely nothing to do with what happened next. Unless, of course, it was the colony governor himself who sent the letter to justify his further actions. Such a version was also considered, but the available facts refuted it. In any case, several hours had elapsed since Winston had read the messages he had received. His wife had gone into town to do some shopping. She returned in high spirits with several bags full to the brim. This was captured by several SecTV cameras at once. However, the smile disappeared from her face as soon as she saw her husband. She entered his office, already starting to say something happy, but almost immediately faltered under his heavy gaze. This footage the judge had to review several times, but somehow coming to terms with what she saw and reacting more or less calmly was hard, especially knowing what happened next. "Honey, what happened?" the poor woman asked, not even realizing what was in store for her. "Something happened," the man confirmed icily. "To be more precise, something's been going on for years, but one old fool only found out about it now. Though of course he could have guessed." "Explain it well," the wife replied with some irritation. "What's all this mystery?" "Oh, I think you ought to know the answer to that riddle perfectly well." Winston stretched out. "Did you really think you could keep it from me indefinitely? The world is not without good men. I know all about your adventures now." "What adventures?" "Winston, what are you talking about? If you want to accuse me of anything, then tell me exactly what it is." "I don't want to accuse you of anything. I just know that the entire time you and I have been married, you've been cheating on me." "With who?" "Hell, with that young boy who's been after you since high school. It turns out he didn't just get cured for nothing. It makes a lot of sense to me now." "What makes you think that?" Winston's wife's tone became frankly indignant. "I tell you, Kind people have opened my eyes. I've seen pictures of you two together. I know where, when, and how you met. I know absolutely everything. So you don't even have to try to make excuses. So show me the picture," she demanded. "Because I burned that abomination." As soon as I saw it, her husband replied indignantly, "Why would I keep them?" "So in essence, you're charging me now without having any evidence in hand. And how do you expect me to refute them? My word against the word of some unknown do-gooders. Who the hell is this Winston? Who do you listen to? Who do you believe them, whoever they are? Or your wife, who has been by your side for 15 years, both for better and for worse?" "I believe my eyes," Winston retorted. "You don't have to disprove anything, you can't anyway. It makes no difference who told me about it. Words can lie, but pictures can't. And what do you want from me now? A divorce." The word sounded tired, somehow doomed. She wasn't admitting guilt, she just didn't see the point in continuing an argument that made no sense anyway. But for Winston, it seemed her remark sounded like an additional confirmation of his rightness. Even on the video, the quality of which left much to be desired, you could see how his expression changed, how there was some manic spark in his eyes. "A divorce, so you can take away everything I've earned through hard work in this horrible place, and live in peace with your lover. No, darling, you won't get off that easy." He grabbed his wife by the arm, jerked her sharply, and led her out into the corridor. She did not resist. She must have been in a state of great shock. She only asked where he was taking her and what he was up to. Winston didn't answer, just smirked evilly. Numerous cameras recorded him dragging her through the prison building towards where the prisoners' housing is located. Fortunately or unfortunately, that's how you look at it. The available footage cut off at the point where Winston led his unfortunate wife into one of the corridors. There was only one cell with prisoners in it. For some reason, the KEC-5 systems were not working in or around that day. The recording had stopped since the morning, an hour after Winston had received the unfortunate letter. The system was damaged, but technicians were unable to determine whether the failure was accidental or intentional. The most likely scenario, however, was that the colony commander had already thought out his sinister plan and made sure that no direct evidence of his guilt survived. Of course, it was pretty obvious what had happened in the ill-fated corridor. Next, Winston had simply left his wife in a cell with 4 thugs who had abused the poor woman all night. But only one thing was not clear, whether he gave the prisoners any instructions or they acted on their own. It didn't matter much, though. He called the police himself. However, at first he told the law enforcers some absolutely fantastic version of what had happened. According to Winston, it turned out that his wife herself for some reason went to the cell to the hardened criminals. He found her only in the morning, when he went round the territory. He must have expected to get away with it this time, too. If the warden said that the wife had gone to the cell by herself, it must have been so. However, the police found this version too implausible. It was decided to conduct a full-scale investigation, which put Winston in the dock. "Your Honor," counsel said, snapping the judge out of his musings, "we are still unable to locate a material witness who can testify in my client's favor. I therefore request that we postpone judgment until the next hearing." "Look," the judge replied tiredly, "this is beyond the bounds of admissibility. This is the 3rd hearing in a row we've postponed judgment. And for this very reason, I'm not even talking about the rest of it. You can look for it indefinitely. So I'm going to have to deny your request unless you're prepared right now to provide new material that might support your position." "Not right now, no, but we're getting close to." In that case, the judge interrupted her sharply. "The court will withdraw for a decision." Part 2. Winston still had before his eyes the terrible picture he had seen in his cell on the morning of the day, after he had learnt of his wife's terrible betrayal. 4 praying prisoners in her body, mutilated, and, as it seemed to him at the time, breathless. True, it later transpired that she was alive. but for how long? Could he have predicted that it would turn out this way? I suppose he could have. After all, he knew very well what kind of guys were in his colony, and especially in this cell, which was safely isolated from all the others. But he really didn't think about that at all as he dragged Veronica through the dark corridors towards her terrible fate. On the other hand, he had never quarreled with these representatives of his institution. They were the most dangerous and perhaps the most disgusting of all who sat here, but they were the most useful. They were the ones who performed all those things that neither he nor any other of the staff could afford to do. It was they who made it possible to maintain iron discipline in the colony. For this in turn, he granted them certain privileges and indulgences which were not generally accorded to prisoners under their articles. Winston suspected, however, that for such people the ability to torture and maim others was already a kind of privilege. It should be. They decided that his own guilty wife was now such a privilege for them. For Winston had never imagined such a thing. It was obvious to him that she and some prisoners were completely different categories. Scare her, he would have said, and that was all. Just scare her and nothing else. A night in a cell with murderers and rapists was going to be a complete horror for her. It would be a fitting punishment for an unfaithful wife, at least in Winston's opinion. But what had happened to her was not what he had expected or asked for. He remembered how the smiles had slid off their faces when he had started shouting at them. Before, as they had gently carried Veronica's body out of the cell, making sure, of course, that the door was locked tight, they had tried to assure him that they had done exactly what was required of them. And at the trial, of course, they testified that they had acted on his orders. And they said a lot of other things that should have got him as much time as they had. But frankly speaking, it didn't matter much to him. Let them put him away for life. He certainly deserved it. His rash act, his stupid outburst of rage, had led to the fact that Veronica might never wake up again. And if she did, what would happen? It would probably be better if she didn't. Better for her. Because otherwise she risks being bedridden for the rest of her life. Not to mention the memories of what had happened to her. Of course, at first, Winston tried for a long time to deceive the policeman who came to call on him. He didn't know why. The habit of lying and dodging must have been so ingrained in his nature that he simply could not do otherwise. He remembered exactly that he had wanted to tell everything as it happened. But his mouth was somehow saying the wrong words in his head at that moment. And at first Winston had refused even to hire a lawyer, saying that he should be defended by a public servant. And he even managed to appoint some uncle, not only indifferent, but openly despising his client. The latter advised him to confess everything as soon as possible and not to waste his precious time. Soon, however, this strange attack of self-abuse ended as suddenly as it had begun. Just as he was once more sitting in his cell listening to the chatter of the government lawyer, it was as if he woke up. At first there was but one thought, characteristic of the old Winston. What on earth do you fool, understand, he thought grudgingly. Of course, he no longer remembered what the unpleasant type had said at that moment, but he remembered his thought very well, because probably it was it that had pulled him out of the darkness, led to the return of his eye. Yes, what had happened to Veronica had shaken his world. It must have even temporarily clouded his judgment. There was no other explanation. Was he to blame for what had happened? That his wife had not been faithful to him? That she had driven him to such a desperate act? That a gang of thugs jumped on her like wild beasts? Had he given them such an order? Of course not. He had no control over them, no way of knowing what would come into their heads. And so, what could he be expected to do? He threw out the public defender, who only by some strange misunderstanding had the proud title of lawyer, and hired one of the best specialists in town to replace him. And it was a woman too. For some reason, Winston always found it easier to get along with them than with members of his own sex. Or maybe it just seemed that way to him. His new protector took to the job with unexpected enthusiasm. Sure, he was paying her good money, but even he himself sometimes felt that she was trying too hard to protect him. He wasn't even sure he could be as persistent as she was. But perhaps that could be explained by her outstanding professional qualities. She had not yet had a single lost case in her portfolio, and she obviously wished to keep it that way. "Hello, Winston," she said coldly, appearing for the first time in the cell. "I'm Beatrice, your new lawyer." "I recognize you." "And who wouldn't recognize you?" Winston smiled. "Let's be honest. You're paying me to get you out of charges of a terrible crime. I've already had time to familiarize myself with some of the case files, and I want to let you know that I am absolutely disgusted with you. So let's cut the pleasantries." "Then why did you agree to defend me?" he wondered. "You pay good money. Besides, your case is in fact an interesting challenge. It will be difficult to prove your innocence, but I think I know how to do it." "And what's your plan?" he asked, throwing back a smile. She gave him a brief outline of the case. His only chance was to convince the court that he had acted in what was called a state of passion and could not have realized the consequences of his reckless act. "You may not believe me, but I really didn't think that. I have absolutely no interest in what you did or did not think." Beatrice interrupted Winston coldly. "In a court of law, believe me, it's not interesting. In any case, you could and should have foreseen this outcome. Another thing is a state of effect, when a person is not at all aware of his actions while under the influence of a great shock." "And can we prove that I was under that particular influence?" Winston asked. "We can try. There are some things in favor of that very theory. For instance, oddly enough, your ridiculous attempt to lie to the police that you had no idea what had happened, and that your wife probably went into the cell with the criminals herself. The thing is, in a state of effect, a person doesn't remember what they've literally just done. Actually, this concept is usually applied to murders or beatings. When a person wakes up, for example, with a bloody knife in their hand and their dead wife beside them, they don't remember what happened. He only remembers that they were quarreling, and then once, and it is as if he woke up and traveled forward in time. Of course, in such a case, it is easy for him to guess that he must have just stabbed his wife to death in a fit of rage. Well, your case is another matter. Frankly, I'm not sure it can be drawn here. But you can try. It's the best you've got anyway. You confessed, of course, on the advice of your previous solicitor. But we can say it was coerced. And you already knew you were on camera, so you decided to confess. But in fact, you don't remember anything from the moment you dragged your wife out of your office. That's understandable, Winston nodded. You were sure, Beatrice continued, that you had simply shoved her out the door. Your next memory is of you in your office drinking whiskey. You turned off the cameras, of course, for nothing. It looks suspicious. On the other hand, who knows what else they might have recorded? I didn't switch off any cameras, Winston protested. I don't even know how to do that. That's what the technicians have always done. I didn't interfere, Winston said. Beatrice shook her head disapprovingly. I realize there are circumstances you would like to keep from justice, but I am your lawyer. I am here precisely to help you, including hiding these facts. And to do that, it's very important that you be as honest with me as possible. But I really didn't switch off any cameras, exclaimed the head of the colony, though now ex-prisoner. Now that's interesting, Beatrice Bryce muttered faintly. And for several minutes she gazed intently into his face without uttering a word. Then, apparently satisfied with her inspection, she nodded and continued. Okay, if you really didn't switch off the cameras, we'll try to prove it. As for all the other accusations regarding breach of instructions, abuse of authority, you and I are powerless here. The evidence is too strong. To even try to deny it would be foolish. But as you realize, this is far from being your main problem. Part 3. Veronica opened her eyes. She tried to move but couldn't. Neither her arms nor her legs wanted to obey her. She could only turn her head slightly, just enough to see some kind of tube right next to her face. Out of the corner of her eye, the woman caught some more details. She realized that she must be lying on a bed. But it wasn't some soft hotel room bed, nor was it the orthopedic check mattress she had at home. The bed was somehow hard and uncomfortable, clearly not meant for people to sleep on. The pillow, on the other hand, was excessively soft. My head felt like it was falling through it, and then it felt too heavy. Maybe it wasn't the pillow, though. The same strange heaviness seemed to be felt in every cell of her body. Comparing all these facts, Veronica came to the obvious conclusion that she was in the hospital. But for what reason? Something serious must have happened. Since she couldn't move a single limb, maybe it was an accident. The last thing she remembered was driving a car, so it must have been on her way home, or she must have been going to visit her husband at work. Yeah, that sounds about right. The bags of groceries and sundries she'd bought for Winston came to mind. Hooked on that detail, she began to untangle the tangle of memories. No further, there was no way this could be an accident. She knew clearly now that she had made it to the colony after all. She remembered how the massive cast iron gates had opened in front of her car, how the familiar guard had smiled at her welcomingly, but still checked her papers. Nothing personal, Veronica. Those are the rules, she smiled. Her mood that day was marvelous. Of course, at the worst of times, as it was hard to upset her with little things like that. But that day she was just incredibly happy, and finally managed to think of exactly what she would give her beloved husband for his birthday. And even managed to find this thing, which was not so easy. Even more difficult, perhaps, was only to guess what the gift for Winston. He was the kind of man who had literally everything, and he didn't like sentimental nonsense. It was hard to please him, for instance, with a thing made by his own hands or some little souvenir, however pretty or expensive. By and large, he considered all gifts for holidays a waste of money and time spent on searching and buying them. But this time, Veronica could be absolutely sure that even he would be pleased with her purchase. All that remained was to figure out how to hide it, so Winston wouldn't see it before time. That was what her head had been occupied with when she entered her husband's study. His head, on the other hand, was obviously preoccupied with something far less pleasant. Veronica realized this as soon as she looked at the expression on Winston's face. It was tense, if not angry. It struck her as odd. Her husband was not inclined to feel such vivid emotions, much less show them. Veronica clearly understood that this was the moment when everything went wrong. Some dramatic event had happened at this point in her personal history. But what kind, she still had no idea. It was this chain of memories, built up with such difficulty, that had broken. It was simply frightening to think about it further. It seemed that her husband was somehow involved in what had happened to her, and I didn't want to believe it. But only such a consideration could explain absolutely everything. But what was worse? The woman knew for a fact that Winston was capable of terrible things. They're convicts, she would say when she was once again horrified by something that was happening in his colony. Murderers, rapists, all sorts of scum. You know they don't get in with the easy stuff. But they're people too. Can't treat people like that, Veronica objected. What kind of people are they? It's you and me who are people. It's those who have suffered from these monsters. They lost the right to fit into that category the moment they committed their crime. Sometimes I don't think you're much different from them. They must not have considered their victims human either, she once said. Veronica thought then that Winston was about to hit her. She could practically see the swing of his hand. She seemed to squint and sag slightly, trying to dodge the blow that didn't come. Either he had managed to pull himself together, or it was just her imagination. Either way, he clearly didn't like it. She didn't bring it up again. But now Veronica could not get rid of one simple thought, wherein her husband's mind laid the boundary that distinguishes a human being from a non-human with whom it is permissible to do anything. Could she have inadvertently, without even noticing, crossed that invisible line? If so, what would Winston do against her She chased such thoughts away, but they came back like a boomerang. And the longer the vicious circle went on, the more she became convinced that her husband had something to do with what had happened to her. If only she could remember what it was. But was it worth remembering? There was no telling what Veronica could come to in her reasoning. There was nothing left for her to do but lie there, stare at the snow-white ceiling and think. And she had no idea how much time had passed since she had awakened when some unexpected sound caught her attention. Mechanistically, she tried to turn her head in the direction it came from. The movement must have been too abrupt. She felt a sharp pain somewhere in the area of her neck. For a while, Veronica didn't know how long. There was nothing else but this all-consuming pain, and she thought she heard some other sounds, or even voices, but she wasn't sure. Maybe it was just a hallucination, some strange fantasy born of this terrible pain. She had read somewhere about such phenomena, though she could hardly remember where or when. But here were Chekhov's. Just as suddenly as the pain appeared, there was no gradual subsiding, as happens when you hit yourself or turn unluckily. As if someone had pulled an invisible switch, her state switched to one in which there was no pain. Veronica only had time to realize that it must be the effect of some strong drug. And then her consciousness floated smoothly back into darkness. Part 4. Veronica was 6 years old when she went to the first grade. It just so happened that she was the only such child that year, so at least in her school. At that age, a year is a very big difference. It had seemed to the girl that a whole gap separated her from the other children, who seemed so mature to her. And after all, they were 7 years old, and some of them were almost 8 years old. And she, as it happened, was in principle too small a child. Skinny, short in stature, she must have taken after her mother, who had always been petite. But what at 30, and a tail seems a plus, at 6 can look like a huge disadvantage. Veronica was frankly frightened by the older, physically stronger and larger children, and absolutely everyone here was like that. They must have been affected by the fact that she, unlike everyone else, had never been to kindergarten, so she had not received any primary socialization. Of course, in their house from time to time there were some children of parental friends, and they themselves went to visit. But it was probably the first time Veronica had seen such a large gathering of people. It was especially ironic, considering that her mother cared a lot about her little girl and wanted to protect her from all kinds of shocks, both from illness and social factors. When she herself was Veronica's age, she had experienced firsthand how cruel children could be, and did not want to repeat that experience for her child. The fact that she had the girl very late in life must have played a role. She was already well into her 40s when she finally had her long-awaited pregnancy. Veronica was born somewhat prematurely. She was a very small and painful baby. Every day the mother was afraid that she would lose her child, which she had dreamed of for so many years. That's why she was overprotective of the girl. She probably would not have put her in school, preferring homeschooling, and certainly it would not have occurred to her that you can put in the first grade a girl who had just turned 6 years old. Then the father finally intervened, who until then had apparently considered raising a child to be his wife's prerogative. However, now it became absolutely obvious to him that no good such hyper-parenting in relation to Veronica cannot lead to anything good. The girl grew up simply not adapted to a full adult life. And those emotions that she felt, standing on the solemn ruler, only proved it. The teacher had already announced that now they would go to class, as someone's heavy hand lay on Veronica's shoulder. She turned round frightened and found an older girl standing next to her, smiling good-naturedly. She had no idea how to react to such a thing, but just in case, she timidly smiled back at her. "Hi, my name is Beatrice. You and I will be in the same class," the stranger said. "I see you're not very used to being surrounded by such a crowd. Let me help you." "To be honest, I'm really not comfortable," Veronica replied gratefully, and introduced herself. They walked to class together, holding hands and chatting merrily about nonsense. Since then, Beatrice had become Veronica's guardian angel. If there were those who wanted to offend the small and modest girl, her friend put them in their place very quickly and effectively. And obviously, without her presence, the school life of the younger girl would be much harder. Veronica, in her turn, also found something to respond to her friend's kindness. Now, she had always been better at her studies than Beatrice. Probably not because she was smarter, but rather more disciplined. She was the one who could sit for hours at a time over her books, while the older of the girls found it boring and unnecessary. But she must have had an incredible talent for explaining complicated things in simple words. And so it turned out that the friends complemented each other perfectly. And by the end of the school period, they were absolutely inseparable. Even the fact that they went to different institutes could not cross out their long-lasting friendship. Veronica was going to become a teacher, Beatrice a lawyer. Both were studying incredibly hard. Nevertheless, once a week they would meet in a cafe somewhere in the evening to share their progress and just to chat. "That Nicholas of yours called me," Beatrice said at one of these meetings, scrutinizing the expression on her friend's face. "Why would he be mine all of a sudden?" Veronica wondered. It was evident that she was greatly disturbed by this news. She immediately started looking around, as if the designated character could be somewhere nearby right now. However, the suspicious Beatrice couldn't rule out that he might indeed be. But at least according to him, he claims, that you're seeing him, except that for some reason he hasn't been able to contact you for a couple of weeks now. Worried, Of course he can't. I've blocked him, Veronica spluttered. And I stopped answering calls from unknown numbers. It wasn't just him calling from his own. I'm thinking whether or not to change the number at all, and then even somehow becomes uncomfortable. And for some reason you never told me about it before. Why? Honestly, I'm used to it, Veronica shrugged. He's been chasing me since the last years of school. You know that, don't you? I know, and to be honest, it's really stressing me out. I thought he'd gotten over it, but it turns out he's been bugging you all this time, Beatrice said thoughtfully. That's not really healthy anymore. Oh, come on, he's just a boy in love. He'll run around and stop. At some point he's got to realize I'm not interested in him at all. He'll calm down, find himself a girlfriend, Veronica replied lightly. Good, if that's the case. But you keep me informed of his adventures just in case. But I've heard all sorts of stories around here, Beatrice shook her head. It's a bit early for professional deformity. You should have finished university first, she laughed. Beatrice only sighed. Her friend had always surprised her by the paradoxical nature of her thinking. On the one hand, she had some underlying heightened anxiety. She was wary of unfamiliar people and places. She often refused to try new things, unless a friend led her by the hand. And on the other hand, this was combined with a kind of unlikely gullibility. If a person treated Veronica without hostility at once, she remembered it and assumed that this would be the case from now on. It did not occur to her that people might have some ulterior motives, that ill might be safely hidden under a mask of courtesy. It must be because she herself had always been an open book, incapable of any intrigue. And if she liked a person, she spoke openly about it, and also openly expressed her dislike. And this honesty of hers sometimes took some very unusual forms. And what was worse, she never waited for a catch where she should have waited for one. True Veronica never had to face the consequences of such a view of life, partly because of her phenomenal luck, partly because Beatrice had always been there for her. Now Veronica saw absolutely no warning signs in Nicholas's behavior. To her, he was just a boy in love. So it had never occurred to her that there were different kinds of love, and that its object could be harmed in any way, not to mention the ease with which unrequited feelings could turn into hatred. At first, however, Beatrice herself did not see anything suspicious in Nicholas's two. And when he appeared on the horizon, they were just finishing 9th grade. As it turned out, He studied in their parallel, but for some reason never attracted the attention of girls. But they attracted his attention very much, or rather not them, but Veronica alone. Then they were to have their first graduation, and all the thoughts of the youngest of the girls were occupied, undoubtedly, with this event. Dancing, midnight walk, and everything else that usually accompanies such events. And of course it would be very good to come there not alone, and not even in the company of a faithful friend. Veronica began to look with interest at the boys around her, to see if anyone would offer to accompany her to this solemn event, but there was no one willing to do so. Then she decided that she should take matters into her own hands. However, the girl received a polite, but quite firm refusal. So that's when Nicholas appeared. He approached Veronica at recess, and he managed to catch such a moment when she was without Beatrice. "Hi," I said to Nicholas from the classroom honestly. "I don't think you ever noticed my existence. But in short, ever since I saw you then back in first grade, at our first lineup, I can't get you out of my head." "You're very nice, thank you." "It's my pleasure," Veronica smiled. "Yeah, and I was wondering if you wouldn't mind getting to know me a little better. For example, we could spend prom night together." "And that's a great idea," Veronica's eyes lit up at that moment. But Nicholas must have taken this enthusiasm as a sign that the girl cared about him too. How could he have known that she was desperate to find a date for the evening? And now she was incredibly pleased that there was at least one boy willing to accompany her. But she was already 10 times sorry for her ill-considered decision. Nicholas would not leave her side and was very indignant when she agreed to dance with any other gentleman. It seemed that he was counting on Veronica to stay by his side all evening, listening to endless stories about his hobbies, which frankly were not very interesting. "Listen, Nicholas," the girl finally couldn't stand it. "I realize that you want to impress me, and that you must be very glad that I agreed to go with you. But it really is I only did it because I had no one else to go with. We're not dating. We didn't even know each other until a fortnight ago. And that's why your jealousy and your desire for me to socialize only with you is completely misplaced. And I, the fool, thought you agreed because you liked me too," Nicholas said, confused. "But you're right, of course. I can hardly be liked by anyone in principle, much less by such a beautiful girl as you." Of course, this statement had an effect on the girl exactly as he had expected. Veronica began to assure him that he was a very nice guy too, and she even said that maybe she could like him too, just not right away. In time, when she got to know him better, but it definitely wouldn't happen in one evening. Then summer came, and with it the story seemed to end. Veronica went first to her grandmother in the village, then to summer camp. She spent August in the city, but she never crossed paths with Nicholas. He must have gone away for the summer. Anyway, the girl had almost forgotten he existed. But as it turned out, he hadn't forgotten about her. On the first day of school, Nicholas came at recess and began, as if nothing had happened, to ask Veronica how her summer had been, and of course telling her about her own. In fact, more telling than asking or listening, and he seemed only interested in talking about himself. Some questions he asked rather out of pretense of politeness. Veronica was saved from an unpleasant conversation by Beatrice. She explained to the annoying boy that if the girl did not reject him outright, she probably did it only out of politeness and modesty, and not because she was so interested in talking to him. When she added that if he really liked her friend, he would have noticed such details himself. "Well, why are you being so sad?" Veronica asked, looking after the departing Nicholas. "It's not like he did anything wrong. But he could really see that you weren't interested in hearing for the 10th time how he teased Grandma's geese, and then they almost pecked him. And you should have been tougher on him yourself. Why give the lad a vain hope?" "I'm not giving him any hope. I told him clearly that I wasn't interested." Veronica was indignant. "And then you said he might be interested. Now, why do you keep talking to him, even though it's obvious that nothing will come of it?" It's not good for him, and it threatens you with all sorts of problems. But why wouldn't it work right away? It's not like I lied to him. Maybe it will work out. After all, he's really not a bad guy. Maybe I'll be able to reciprocate his feelings after all. That's unlikely. He's the kind of annoying guy you'd expect to find. To tell you the truth, I don't think he's really interested in you. It's more like he saw a compliant girl who could be bullshitted. You probably really think this is going to work out, don't you? But believe me, you don't want it. Veronica chose to listen to her friend then. But no matter how much she told Nicholas that it wouldn't work out, he didn't want to fall behind. The guy as if and did not listen to the words of her beloved, and for sake of silence, when she once again tried to get rid of him, as if nothing had happened, he continued his story from the point where he had interrupted it. These actions of his from time to time shook Veronica's confidence that she was doing the right thing. Now and then she began to wonder if she should give this relationship a chance. She didn't have and didn't foresee any other. He's trying to get the girl he likes. That's normal. All guys do it. Some of them even succeed, she told Beatrice. He's not trying to get something. When they do, they give flowers and gifts, they call you out, they do something nice for their girlfriend. And he acts like you're already his girlfriend. And the one who needs this relationship almost more than he himself. Approximately so passed their last 2 years in the school walls. After that, everything began to turn round. Exams, admission, studying at the institute, a whole new life, completely new people. Beatrice was truly convinced that Nicholas had fallen behind with the rest of the world, seemingly forever in the past for them. Now it suddenly became clear that he hadn't. He continued his communication with Veronica, apparently in exactly the same style as before. Except that before, as far as she knew, he had only been so annoying to her friend inside the school walls. But now it seemed his activities were expanding. And Veronica was not too eager to tell her friend that it was not limited to calls. It happens that Nicholas appears near the institute near the house, and in principle can suddenly appear anywhere, as if he was watching her movements. And now, when she tried to limit his intrusive communication, he had gone so far as to try to find her through a friend. It all sounded alarming, and Beatrice did not like it at all. Veronica, however, seemed to regard the intrusive suitor as an annoying nuisance, nothing more. No assurances that it might be more serious than she thought, and that she should take some measures to protect herself did not work on her. Nicholas, meanwhile, began to appear more and more often and to behave more and more brazenly. By the end of the institute, it began to strain even Veronica herself. Several times she tried to talk to the guy that his behavior was completely unacceptable. But he only smirked, answering something like, "Don't be dramatic. It's okay. I know it's your girlfriend who's turning you against me. I've never liked them. Beatrice is worried about me. And to tell you the truth, I'm starting to worry about me too," Veronica objected. "Please leave me alone, Nicholas." "I'm the one who's worried for you," he replied as if nothing had happened. "She's trying to control you. I know if it weren't for her, we'd have been living together a long time ago. I can see the way you look at me." "I'm not looking at you in any way." Veronica finally flared up. "I don't want to see you at all. Do you understand? I'm sick of your prying. I'm sick of not being able to go anywhere without fear of seeing you. I'm sick of not being able to even start a relationship with anyone because of you. After all, everyone thinks I already have a boyfriend, even though it's not true." "Okay, so that's not good," Nicholas squinted. "You mean I'm preventing you from getting a boyfriend? Although, by and large, you have one and have had one for a long time. I thought you said all you needed to do was get to know me better." "So? It's been years. You still don't know well enough." "Now I think I know you too well. I didn't promise I'd be with you. I only said it was possible. But I'm sorry it didn't work out. And it couldn't have, given your behavior. Now I just want you to leave me alone." "What?" And here he was suddenly cold and indifferent. "Okay, if that's what you think, I won't bother you anymore. Just when you realize what kind of guy you've lost, don't come looking for me and tell me you want to be with me. Okay, you'll regret your decision later, but it'll be too late." Beatrice was very disturbed by this sentence. She surmised that now the hapless lover might want to take revenge on Veronica. However, to her surprise, nothing of the sort happened. It was as if Nicholas really had finally realized what was wanted of him and left the girl alone. It seemed that now they could breathe a sigh of relief. Thus came a new period in their lives, now all grown up. Both of them took new jobs. Both of them plunged into the labor force. For the time being, they continued to maintain their friendship, which they carried through life. However, to continue too long, their relationship was not destined. And the breakup began banally simple. Veronica met a new man. He was a bit older than her, but on the whole he turned out to be quite a good guy. Calm, reliable, the kind of guy you really feel safe with. And at first Beatrice, who knew him only from her friend's stories, was genuinely happy for her. But then things changed. No, she never got to see Winston, her friend's new boyfriend. But she got the information that changed her attitude to Veronica's chosen one forever. Some of this information had been told her by the girl in love herself. Some of it had been specially found by Beatrice, and altogether painted a very unpleasant picture in her mind. "Veronica, are you really sure you want it?" Beatrice inquired simply. "I'm sure," the latter replied unnecessarily sharply. "To be honest, I don't think I've ever been more sure of anything than I am that I really want to marry and go away with him to some godforsaken little town in the far north, where he's also working as a warden in some colony for the most incorrigible cons. He's a warden there now. In a few years he'll be a warden. That's not the point. You realize it's a very specific place, and his duties are very specific too. Besides, there are all sorts of bad rumors about what goes on in this colony." Veronica interrupted her friend sharply. "So there are always rumors, but even if they are true, my Winston certainly had nothing to do with this horror. I wouldn't be so sure of that." "Besides," Beatrice began, but Veronica interrupted her again. "I don't wish to hear anything about it. Nothing at all. You've already ruined my personal life once. I don't know if it was out of jealousy, or if you really thought it would be better for me, but I'm not going to let you do it again." "What?" Beatrice choked on the tea she was drinking at that moment. "You made me break up with Nicholas without even trying to meaningfully build a relationship with him, right? Because of you. Because of your hints that there was something wrong with him, that he was acting weird, and that I should run away from him. That's what's starting to happen now. I wish you'd get on with your personal life. Veronica, I care about you. You're like a sister to me, and you know it. And maybe I do, but I'm no longer the little girl you took under your wing in first grade. I'm very grateful for everything you've done for me. I really am. But like it or not, I've grown up and I don't need your patronage anymore." To whether she had thought of this on her own or under the influence of her future husband, Beatrice did not know. And the only thing that was clear was that it was useless to argue with her friend, and she was determined to go north with Winston, and nothing could stop her. For the first couple of years they kept in touch with each other, but gradually the letters and calls became fewer and fewer. Veronica seemed to be shutting herself off from Beatrice more and more. The latter assumed that it had something to do with her husband's illegal activities, which were becoming more and more public. In any case, as time went on, their communication ceased altogether, as if it had never existed. It is not known how this breakup experienced Veronica, but Beatrice was sad and a little scared. The friend, however, she had her own life. And the more time passed, the less she thought of Veronica and eventually stopped remembering her altogether. Colony Chief says he had no idea how his decision to give his own wife to an angry mob of convicts would turn out. The headline caught her eye immediately. Beatrice bought the paper, something she had never done before. She herself did not fully understand what motivated her to do so. The paper was frankly yellow, and in Beatrice's opinion, it was only good enough to replace toilet paper, and that only if absolutely necessary, if there were no other options at hand. Nevertheless, the title gave her a vague uneasiness, the nature of which she did not fully realize. It was not until she began to read the disgusting article and came across the names of the protagonists that Beatrice realized that she must have suspected even earlier that it was about Veronica and her husband. But she was afraid to admit it to herself. Putting the paper aside, she sat there for a while, not knowing what to do or how to react. Horror and a vague sense of guilt settled in her soul. Not that she had expected anything like this when she had tried to talk her friend out of the marriage. Such terrible things could not have occurred to her. And yet she knew that this story could not end well for Veronica. At the same time, something told Beatrice that it was not so simple and obvious as it might seem at first sight. And that is, of course, there is no doubt that his monstrous act Winston committed completely independently. But as if that wasn't all there was to it, as if someone was guiding his hand. If, of course, the story about the letter was true. But to this fact, no one was determined to pay attention. Beatrice had once resolved to make her own inquiry, but she had had very little opportunity to do so. Who would allow her to see the materials presented in court, not to mention everything else? There was only one option, the most unpleasant, and in general, requiring a serious bargain with her own conscience. However, it was the only chance she had to find out exactly what had happened to her friend, and who was responsible besides, of course, Winston himself. There was simply no other she could have had. In the meantime, the governor of the colony wished to get a new lawyer to replace the one assigned to him by the state. Beatrice realized that if she agreed to this, she would have to defend him like any other of her clients. It was a matter, one might say, of honor and, of course, of professional reputation. She had never lost a case in her long career, and she didn't want to start that now. Besides, it was not only a question of whether they would win or not. Anyone who wished would be able to familiarize themselves with the case files and check exactly how she worked. If it turns out that she was not doing it well enough, you can safely change the field of activity. She simply will not have clients. And if it turns out that she actually has a conflict of interest. She hesitated for a while, of course, but then she decided that finding out the truth was worth any risks. One very simple and at the same time very frightening consideration came to her mind. If the mysterious intruder wanted Veronica dead, he had not yet achieved his purpose, and therefore her friend was still in terrible danger. The only chance to save her, if it is of course still possible, to find that missing link. The first conversation with the defendant, and all the subsequent ones after that, convinced Beatrice that she was right. There was no reason to doubt that the man had indeed received the letter. There was no reason to doubt that the man had indeed received the letter, or even that it contained the very material he had spoken of. In addition, it appeared that he had indeed kept the cameras on, and that, in turn, helped testify to one of two things. Either there really was some sort of technical glitch, and coincidentally it happened on the day of the crime, or someone had deliberately switched off the cameras, and in such a way as to make Winston even more suspicious. In fact, the longer Beatrice dug into the case, the less she realized who this shadowy criminal was actually acting against. Did he really want to massacre Veronica, or was she to be an accidental victim, collateral damage, so to speak? The lawyer herself would not have been able to articulate exactly where she got such suspicions from, and yet she had the distinct feeling that it was all just to set Winston up. This, of course, did not add to her sympathy for her client, but it made the potential gray cardinal even more dangerous. And it was one thing if he had some grievance against Veronica, and quite another if he was prepared to achieve his ends at the cost of such horrors happening to a woman he did not know at all. "Why are you fussing about that damned letter?" Winston, meanwhile, was puzzled. "And what does it matter what happened to those cameras in the end?" "And how, you ask? To prove your words that you really received some dirt on his wife?" She was indignant. "After all, your entire defense is based on that, and why the cameras weren't working. That's the most important thing in this case. But it is unlikely that even if you find this person, he will say, 'Yes, I sent a letter with dirt.' He'll probably deny it, or he'll be implicated as an accessory." "Look, Winston, why don't you tell me how to do my job? By the way, the fact that you're still in a detention center and not in your own prison is entirely my fault. And I hope you realize the fundamental difference between the two places of detention." "I do. And yet it seems to me." When it seems, Beatrice interrupted sharply, "it is better to think again. You see, until we find this man, you haven't the slightest chance of a favorable outcome." As a matter of fact, of course, she had no such chance. Having thus and so thoroughly familiarized herself with all that the court had to offer, Beatrice found, with some satisfaction even, that her client's road was one straight and clear. The best lawyer in the world, acting of course by legal methods, could not have exonerated him from these charges. So all she had to do was indeed to do her job diligently and well. Winston's fate was completely independent of her actions, and so she could get out of this situation without losing anything in terms of professional reputation, and at the same time without letting this terrible man go free. Meanwhile, the mysterious sender of the letter did not want to be found. Beatrice reviewed the surveillance tape at the post office hundreds of times, but the man who went there had obviously envisaged the presence of the camera. His face was completely hooded, a stealthy figure, overly broad in a roomy sweatshirt. It was hard to say anything definitive about him. This made Beatrice even more convinced that he was not just trying to open the eyes of a deceived husband, but was deliberately weaving a complex web in which either Winston Hemp or his unhappy wife was to be caught. This very man would very much not want anyone to recognize him. And yet, the more Beatrice looked at the tape, the stronger became her suspicion that she was somehow acquainted with this mysterious subject. There must have been something in his gait and movements that gave him away that he apparently hadn't foreseen, but no ideas of who it could be crossed the woman's mind. Nothing was clear with the cameras either. Beatrice hired a team of the best technicians she could find, and they unanimously asserted if the cause of the breakdown was a person, then a very high-class specialist, a master of his trade, who managed to adjust everything so that it looked as if it broke down on its own. And of course, the head of the colony could not even dream of such a level. So maybe it was one of the technicians who worked at my colony. Winston made a sudden suggestion. I don't know why any of them would do something like that, but at least they had access to all this stuff, and some understanding of how they work. Sounds logical. Very logical, Beatrice agreed. You keep personnel files, don't you? Where can I find them? To be honest, the thought of looking among the staff had not occurred to her. Perhaps it was because she had a low opinion of the mental capacity of the staff of such establishments. But if someone wanted to get close to Winston or his wife, it was logical to get a job close to their victim. Only now did she set about going through the personnel files of the colony's employees. First the technicians, and then everyone else. After all, the easiest place to hide was where no one would look for you. And having made sure that there was no one suspicious among the computer specialists, Beatrice decided that she should start studying the unskilled staff, cleaners, caretakers, and so on. Flipping through the files, she didn't expect to find anything particularly interesting. The name of the next janitor was on the first page. It did not tell her anything. On the next page, however, Beatrice saw a photograph, and a cold sweat broke out. He had undoubtedly aged a great deal, but it was impossible not to recognize him. She quickly stuffed the folder she had just been studying into her bag and rushed out of her office. If she wasn't mistaken, it was really him, and that explained everything. It also meant that Veronica was still in terrible danger. Action had to be taken immediately, unless of course it was too late. Hour 6. The policeman waved his wand unhappily at the car that had whizzed past him at wild speeds. He thought that he should catch up with the negligent driver who didn't even think of stopping at his signal. But then he decided that he was in a good mood today, and the road led to the hospital. There's no telling what's happened to a man. Maybe he was dying, or on the contrary, giving birth. However, when after the first daredevil, the second one flew by, with a difference of only 3 or 4 minutes, it was impossible to bear it. The policeman jumped into his own car and chased the offender. He drove so fast that his old car was simply not able to develop the same speed. Nevertheless, when he arrived at the hospital building, the man saw that both of the cars he was interested in were there. The one was abandoned in the middle of the road. The other was parked as it should be, although crooked. A disheveled woman was getting out of the ladder. He went to her. "Citizen, why are we violating and not responding to the lawful demands of a police officer?" he asked in a businesslike manner, taking out of his pocket the forms for fines. "Come with me," she said defiantly, shoving him out of the way with her shoulder. "Your help might come in handy. You are, after all, a kind of policeman too." "I'm not going anywhere with you. You're the one who will go with me now for insubordination." The policeman was indignant. "Listen," she said sharply, without retracing her steps. "You can stay here and write me 100 tickets. But if I don't get to the hospital building now, there may be an offense far worse than my speeding." With these words, Beatrice, and it was she, slammed the heavy hospital door right in the face of the hapless traffic cop. She had no idea whether he would continue his pursuit. If he did, it would be even better. She'd have a witness, perhaps an assistant too. But she couldn't wait for him to make up his mind. She had already made some inquiries on the way, and the man she was interested in was familiar to her. And what was Beatrice's horror when she noticed that it was his car that overtook her and sped towards the hospital where Veronica was lying. She was already pushing the accelerator pedal to the floor in spite of the speed limits, and still he obviously had to arrive at the place a little faster. Literally bursting into the hospital, she rushed to the 5th floor without waiting for the lift. But why hadn't she thought of that before? Why, after all, had she not hired someone to be on constant duty at Veronica's room? Or she suspected someone might try to finish what she'd started. But she must have thought that it was unlikely that anyone would lay a hand on a woman who was already in a severe coma, and not even sure she'd be able to get out of it. But now that she realized who was behind what had happened, she realized that she had underestimated her adversary, and now she just prayed that it wasn't too late. So when she saw his car heading for the hospital, she was certainly frightened, and at the same time regained some of the hope she had almost lost. If he was on his way to see Veronica right now, then he hadn't had time to do any damage yet, and he wouldn't have time to do any more. But only if Beatrice hurried properly. When she came panting down the stairs and into the room, Veronica was lying on the couch, screaming in pain. A certain dark figure loomed beside her. Beatrice didn't know what he was doing, but she was sure of one thing: nothing good. Leaping towards the intruder, she tried to pull him away from her friend. A fierce struggle ensued between them. Beatrice noticed something glinting in his hand and immediately guessed it must be a syringe. It looked like the man was trying to inject some kind of crap into Veronica's IV. Now, in all likelihood, he was aiming to dispense the remaining dose to her. As desperately as Beatrice struggled, her opponent clearly had more physical strength. At some point, The woman felt that he had succeeded in realizing his intentions. A sharp pain pierced her shoulder. She realized that this was the end. Her eyes blurred and her consciousness began to fade. However, she was still aware of heavy male hands on her throat. Some kind of drug must have gone into her head. He was going to strangle her to be sure. And then, there was no doubt he would finish what he had started. Who knows what's next? Either way, she'd obviously messed up his plans. He was obviously going to overdose Veronica with some kind of drug, adding it to the drip. It would have been the perfect crime. The woman was already on the verge of life and death. No one would have thought it suspicious that she'd crossed that line. No one would have even bothered to inquire and would never have known what had happened. But things hadn't gone according to his plan at all. Starting, obviously, with the fact that when he got to the ward, Veronica was already awake. One way or another, someone would have come running at her desperate scream and caught him in the act. Perhaps it was already too late. Her thoughts were jumbled. But Beatrice realized one thing clearly. As long as she could fight, she must do so, not for her own sake, but for Veronica's. Perhaps she could still be saved. Perhaps someone would hear the sounds of the struggle and come to her aid. Consciousness was about to leave her. When she felt the man loosen his grip, she did not immediately realize what had happened. It was only when she caught a glimpse of another vague figure behind the murderer that she realized that the policeman must have decided to follow her and arrived just in time. Beatrice did not know how long she'd been unconscious. However, when she woke up, her first thought was Veronica. She couldn't figure out why she had thought of her friend. The events of the last few weeks were blurring her memory. They were fuzzy, as if covered with a foggy veil. The woman realized quite quickly that she was in a hospital bed. She tried to reconstruct the chain of events that had brought her here. It was somehow very difficult to do so. She remembered that she had been working on some heavy case. She guessed it had something to do with Veronica. Right. She was defending her husband against accusations of brutally murdering his own wife. But why would she do that? After all, she had no warm feelings for this man and would hardly help him, even if he really was innocent. Unless it was to find the real killer. Shah, a familiar voice, suddenly sounded somewhere nearby. Don't strain yourself. Don't try to remember. It's okay. It'll all come back. This will only give you a headache. Beatrice turned her head towards the source of the sound and saw Veronica lying on the next bunk, smiling weakly. Her brain got the jolt it needed, and the rest of the events lined up on their own. Now she knew exactly what had happened. Almost. Nicholas has been detained, she whispered. Nicholas? What does this have to do with Nicholas? What's even going on? Honestly, I stopped making any sense at all. I woke up for what seems like more than the first time, and here you are. I'm glad you're awake, Beatrice said offhandedly, but we may still be in danger. I will certainly tell you all about it, but I need to be sure. I don't think we're in any danger. There are 2 policemen on duty outside the door, and you're sure you're allowed to do that? Veronica shook her head. Beatrice didn't care. Throwing aside the blanket someone had carefully covered her with, she jumped up from the bed with a jerk. Her eyes went black for a few seconds. The woman managed to keep her balance. Now, acting more carefully, she headed straight for the exit of the room. There were indeed a couple of policemen sitting near the door. They stared at her in surprise. They must not have expected her to wake up so quickly, or at least be able to walk. None of them seemed to know how to act in such a situation. Apparently, they were not supposed to let any outsiders into the room. But how to act if someone wanted to come out? They hadn't been instructed. Has he been captured? Beatrice asked. The man who tried to kill me and my friend. Is he under arrest? Yes, one of the policemen muttered with evident relief. He was apprehended by a traffic policeman. I don't know how he got here. But I do. Look, is it possible to get one of the doctors? I've got a lot of work to do and I don't have time to be here." "You don't have any work to do." One of the policemen shook his head languidly. "Winston, when he found out you were in the hospital, rushed to fire you and hire a new lawyer. But it wasn't clear how soon you'd wake up. He's got appeals and stuff." "To hell with Winston." Beatrice burst out. "I've got to talk to the prosecutor, the investigators, whoever. This man was here for a reason and he attacked me and not just me. This case is connected to Veronica's case and, well, why am I explaining this to you? Just get the doctor and that's it." "Okay, but I don't think." "It's not your job to think, as far as I know." Beatrice interrupted him rudely and closed the ward door. "Explain clearly what's going on. Why are you here? What does Nicholas have to do with this? Where did he even come from? After all, I Winston me." "Shay," Beatrice said in a soothing tone without thinking about what had happened. "There's no changing that now." "No, I want to know what's going on. Tell me everything. I'm going to freak out." "Okay," Beatrice sighed. "I'm not entirely sure of everything myself yet, but I'll try to explain how I see it all. Mind you, if I notice that my story is making you feel worse, I'll stop it immediately." "That's reasonable," Veronica nodded. "What is?" "You see, when what happened happened. Anyway, I became Winston's lawyer. No matter what, it was my only chance to get involved in the investigation. I suspected even then that it wasn't as simple as it looked. Of course, that scoundrel, your husband, was responsible for what happened, but he wasn't the only one." Part 7. When Veronica decided to finally sever any ties with Nicholas, he threatened that she would regret it, and that was the meaning of his life. He could not forgive the girl that she rejected him, and continued to follow her life with manic persistence, without, however, showing himself. He must not have had the slightest idea of what his revenge would look like, and he only knew that he had to take revenge on her for all the imaginary humiliation she had inflicted on him. He was just waiting for the right moment, sure that sooner or later it was aimed to him. At first it had been quite innocent. The guy hoped that Veronica would actually realize that he was the best thing that had happened in her life. And of course, she'd come back to him. And he would accept her, of course, but not immediately. He would make her go through the same things that he himself had been going through for many years, so that she would realize how painful and humiliating it all was. But as time went on, Veronica did not appear. Moreover, she was, to all appearances, perfectly happy, socializing with friends, and even going out with some guys. In short, she obviously wasn't worried at all about what a wonderful person she had lost. This undoubtedly annoyed Nicholas, as she led such a contented life while he continued to suffer from his unrequited love for her. He no longer wanted her back. He wanted her to suffer, and preferably for the rest of her life. It became as if he was obsessed with her. He could no longer do anything but follow her. Of course, it couldn't help but affect his own life. He dropped out of his final year of technical school, where he had previously been an honors student, and Nicholas no doubt saw Veronica's fault in that too. Meanwhile, she was doing very well. She graduated from the institute and got a job, and this was a terrible blow, she found a man. Nicholas had somehow realized that it was more than just her student affairs, and he was right. Very soon she was going to marry this man and even move with him to some remote place. Nicholas decidedly did not understand why she had made such a choice. Wasn't he a promising programmer? And wasn't he better than some custodian of a rundown prison? What was the reason why some people got everything, and others, undoubtedly more deserving, nothing? Where is justice in this life? Now he hated not only Veronica, but also her future husband. Nicholas had nothing left to lose. At least, he was sincerely convinced of it. That's why, without thinking for too long, he set off after his former lover and her new chosen one. He didn't have any concrete plan yet, but he wanted to at least keep the couple in his sight. She changed his name and surname and got a job in the same colony as a janitor. A simple, inconspicuous position. Subsequently, Veronica passed by him many times and did not even say hello, but looked as if through Nicholas and did not recognize him at all. This annoyed the man, but at the same time was to his advantage. During the years he had spent in prison, he had learnt both the local customs and the personality of Winston, who had become the man in charge quite soon after his marriage. Nicholas was in no hurry. He worked out the perfect plan, reminding himself daily that revenge is a dish served cold. It would strike at a time when Veronica was perfectly happy and not expecting any catch. And so, after many years, his plan was finally ready. Examining it from all sides, Nicholas saw no flaw in it, and it was to strike at once at both his enemies, at the traitor Veronica and at her hubby. One would die a horrible death, and the other would go to jail for life. The four hardened cons had long had a grudge against Winston. They did not like the fact that he used them as if they were chained dogs, sixed them on those who did not please him, and gave them sugar bones in the form of some relaxation of the regime. Before his elevation, it was they who were in charge here. The previous head of the colony feared them to the point of trembling. They were the ones who made the rules. Winston, in his pride of course, did not notice it, thinking that he kept them on a short leash. But Nicholas did, and came to the fore with a business proposition. At first, however, they did not take him seriously and began to mock him. This, of course, was not to his liking, but for the sake of his plan, he was prepared to be patient. "I can give you the colony governor's wife," he said, "with whom you can do whatever you like. Well, you don't generally care anymore. You'll never get out of here anyway. It'll be bad for him. Besides, I can make sure that he's the one who gets blamed for what happened." "Do you have any idea what would happen to him then?" Nicholas asked. "Well, let's say. But how would you do it?" replied one of them. "And that's already my problem, isn't it? All you have to do is make sure this thing never wakes up again. Do I make myself clear?" "You couldn't be clearer. What's in it for you?" "Well, personal interest, just like you. When the trial starts, blame it on the chief. It's a good thing he brought her to you, and you'll get what you want. It'll be a win-win for me and everybody else." Getting these thugs to agree was probably the hardest part. Everything else went smoothly. Nicholas was even surprised at how easy it all turned out to be. He went to the post office, and with his sweatshirt on and a hood over his face, he sent a message to Winston. The message was masterfully crafted. Nicholas was incredibly proud that he'd managed to pull such a thing off, especially when it worked exactly as he'd hoped it would. It was not for nothing that he had spent years studying his opponent's character. Now he knew exactly what strings of his soul it made sense to play on. In all the colors and details he described how Veronica had had an affair with him, allegedly all the time she'd been married to Winston. He described how the wife really hated the warden, lived with him solely for the money, all the while running around to her younger, better-looking lover. He also attached fake photos, using an image of herself from about 5 years ago. So, firstly, Winston would clearly be more painful, and secondly, it is unlikely that they could recognize the current Nicholas. He grew a beard, although perhaps it was even an unnecessary precaution. He had long ago realized that no one paid attention to a simple prison janitor. Nicholas was even able to calculate the date the letter would arrive. Nicholas knew for sure that Winston would pick up the letter in the morning, just when his wife would be in town. That way he would have more time to get himself worked up and be ready to do the craziest things when Veronica returned. It was clear that Winston would solve the problem in the usual way, with the help of his pocket prisoners, who were already ready for such a development and even looked forward to it. Nicholas only had to switch off the cameras to make the chief even more suspicious and admire the unfolding tragedy. But things didn't go according to plan from there. Firstly, the criminals failed to follow through. Of course, Veronica had little chance to survive, but still she was still alive, and at any moment could come to her senses. Of course, it would make little difference in a global sense, but it was her death that Nicholas craved. Secondly, there was Beatrice, whose existence he had forgotten. But now he remembered, as well as the fact that it was she who had contributed to the destruction of his happiness all those years ago, and now appeared to spoil his revenge. She was almost out to get him, and Nicholas realized that action had to be taken immediately. He went to the hospital to Veronica, deciding that he had to finish what he had started with his own hands. The method was simple and straightforward, a little extra medication in the drip, and no one would check it out. The patient was already on the verge of death, and no one would find anything suspicious in the fact that she had finally passed away. But the luck that Nicholas had had so far seemed to have turned against him when he sneaked into the room. Veronica was already conscious and worse, had begun to scream. He hadn't even been able to get to her yet. How could she have seen him in the darkness? Had she realized that he had come with bad intentions? There was no time to think about it. It was now simply too dangerous to keep her alive, and he jumped to the woman and began frantically injecting the drug into one of her many drips. Nicholas hoped he could get away before anyone heard the screams, but that wasn't destined to happen. The same ubiquitous Beatrice popped up out of nowhere, and even with her he was almost done. Injected her with the rest of the drug meant for a friend. Almost strangled her. It was a stupid thing to do, but now he was driven by emotion alone. There was nothing left in him but blind rage and the desire to destroy all those who, as he believed, were responsible for his troubles. And then a new attack. At first, Nicholas thought that he underestimated Beatrice, and she managed to call the police. But then he noticed with surprise that the man who had dragged him away from the woman was for some reason dressed in the uniform of a traffic policeman, as if fate itself had decided to play a cruel joke on him, showing that none of his plans were destined to come true. Then he sat down heavily on the floor and started laughing, ending all resistance. The man in a traffic policeman's uniform twisted him up without any problems and called the real policeman. When they arrived, Nicholas could not calm down. He even heard them discussing whether they should take him to the station or to a psychiatric hospital. But he didn't care anymore. Part 8. Winston was sentenced to life imprisonment for his numerous crimes. The new information that had come to light about Nicholas did nothing to help him. The court felt that he should have realized in any case that his actions could lead to such a dire result. Together with his new lawyer, the former prison governor tried to challenge this decision in all possible higher instances, but it remained unchanged. He was to serve his sentence in the same prison he had run for many years. The 4 prisoners who had directly committed the crime were very happy about this state of affairs, but only until they learned that they themselves were being transferred with new sentences to another prison, even more northern, far away from any civilization. But they were not seen to have committed any breaches of the regime. Nicholas was found to be mentally insane and sent to appropriate institutions for treatment. The failure of the plan, which was so close to success, must have brought him to a severe nervous breakdown. The man was able to stop laughing only after he was taken to the hospital, where he was injected with a sedative. Nevertheless, the state in which Nicholas fell into in no way can serve as an excuse for what he did. After his recovery, he will face trial on charges of organizing a violent crime as well as attempted murder. At any outcome of the case, he will receive a lengthy prison sentence. Beatrice left the hospital the same day she got there, despite the doctor's words that she had better stay at least a week. She really had a lot of work to do. She had to collect and organize the evidence against Nicholas so that he would certainly not be able to escape responsibility. It was largely thanks to her work that his trial had been possible. Veronica spent several more months in hospital. Her recovery was slow. She had to undergo several difficult operations. All this difficult time, Beatrice tried to be close to her friend and support her. After all, in addition to physical injuries, the woman received deep psychological trauma. When all the trials were over and Veronica had finished the main stage of treatment, the friends realized that they both had nothing more to do in the distant northern city. Together they returned to their homeland. The younger woman had to rebuild her life after all the horror she had endured. Beatrice was ready to give her all the support she could. It took many years before Veronica was able to finally get back on her feet and heal not only physically, but also mentally. Nevertheless, with the great help of her friend, she succeeded. She remembered what it is to live and enjoy life. And even in spite of everything, she was able to meet men again and somehow establish her personal life. Beatrice's and Veronica's weddings took place on the same day. They celebrated noisily, with a bang, although it might seem to some people that at their age, it is somehow not accepted. Nevertheless, the two friends were only interested in the opinion of each other and, of course, their future husbands, in whom they were 100% sure. As time showed, they were not mistaken. Their chosen ones turned out to be really worthy men, sincerely loving their wives and ready to share with them both sorrow and joy. Now they were family friends, trying to help each other and together to go through all the difficulties and hardships. Contrary to doctors' predictions, Veronica managed to get pregnant and gave birth to a healthy, strong girl named, of course, Beatrice. And a week after this happy event in the family of the second friend also appeared a child, a boy, Peter. Many years later, these children were destined to become husband and wife, but that is another story.
Amanda looked up. She raised her head, trying to look up to the roof of the 16-story building. She had to squint all the time. Heavy drops of cold fall rain were falling from the sky. The girl was already completely soaked and cold. At least she should have been, because she had left the house in what she was wearing, shorts and a long, stretched t-shirt. And it's October outside. People are already wearing jackets and bouncing around, and then there's that nasty rain. But Amanda felt almost nothing physically right now. All of her senses were overshadowed by heartache. So much so that she didn't even want to live. What was there to live for? What was ahead of her now but shame and a meaningless, miserable existence? Not only that she had sealed her fate, but she would ruin her family's life if she stayed with them. No, it would be better to disappear from this world altogether, Amanda said. That's why she'd come to the only high-rise in the neighborhood. The other houses were two low Khrushchev 5-story buildings. And the new building, a pleasant soft blue color, towered above them like an ornate candle. The best place could not be thought of. This frightening yet life-saving thought came to Amanda suddenly. She was home alone. Her younger brothers were at school, her father and stepmother at work. Rain drummed against the window, and Amanda sat on her bed with her arms wrapped around her knees and rocked. She seemed to cry when no one was home. The girl could afford to let her feelings come out. Sometimes it got a little easier, but not now, because soon everyone would know everything. She couldn't hide it from her family forever. Then what would she do? No one would support Amanda. They won't kick her out of the house, of course, but they'll blame her all the time. Because she's in trouble. Of course, life will be a never-ending nightmare. And it's all her fault, no one else's. I should have been so stupid. Amanda had never been very close to her father. He seemed to love her, his only daughter, but to talk to his child, to ask how she was doing. No, that never happened. Her father was interested in Amanda's grades, her household needs, sometimes her health. And that was it. The other thing is the sons, the common children with the new wife, Amanda's younger brothers. That's where the father went fishing with them and made jokes. What about the stepmother? When she first married her father, she seemed sympathetic to Amanda. But then she had children of her own, boys who were 1.5 years old. And the girl immediately felt superfluous, like a fifth wheel on a cart. No, her stepmother didn't starve her and didn't bog her down with work, as in old fairy tales, but she didn't give her any warmth. She performed her duties to bring up her stepdaughter as an unloved, but necessary work. That's all. Amanda might not have noticed her parents' coldness toward herself, but she saw how they treated Michael and Timothy, and that sometimes made her hurt and resentful. And lonely. Well, what did you want? Amanda was once enlightened by her neighbor in the stairwell, Aunt Lucy. The girl then studied in the 8th grade and complained to her acquaintance that none of her parents could not come to her on a school holiday. For stepmother, you are a stranger. And your father? Men, they love children from their favorite women. And the woman he loves is his current wife. What about Mom? Amanda took offense to Mom. Tatiana is his past Aunt Lucy sighed heavily. She was once friends with Amanda's mother. Your stepmother is your real stepmother. That's the conclusion to draw. Tears sprang from Amanda's eyes again at the memory of her dearest person. How she missed her mom right now. Mom would definitely have supported her daughter in a difficult situation if she had been there for her. Amanda wouldn't be afraid of anything at that moment. Together they would definitely think of something. Mom never scolded Amanda. If the girl was wrong, she would calmly point out her mistakes and explain at length, in detail, with examples, telling her why it was necessary to act this way and not that way. At that moment, Amanda felt so happy, so loved. Mom was the closest and dearest person for the girl. Her smile was as warm as the sun, and her tender hands seemed to protect her from all troubles and misfortunes. Once Amanda thought her mom was eternal, strong, reliable, and vulnerable. How wrong she was. The tragedy happened when the girl was in the first grade. Amanda, as always, came home after school, heated food from the refrigerator, had lunch, did her homework. Her mom was about to come home from work, followed by her dad. A cozy evening with the family lay ahead. Mom would probably come back with buns from the factory canteen. They're so fluffy, so fragrant. Adult and child will drink tea together and talk about everything in the world. Amanda will tell her parents how her teacher praised her today. But it was 7, then 8, and Mom and Dad were still gone. Darkness thickened outside the window. From the street came the long howl of the wind. The February weather had gotten worse. Amanda realized something was wrong. She crawled onto the couch, piled up her pillows, and waited. She was so scared alone in an empty apartment. If only she had a little sister or a brother, it would be more fun together. Amanda asked her parents many times to give birth to someone else, but they laughed and explained that they had a small apartment, 2 rooms only. They would expand, and then they could think about it. Finally, the key turned in the lock. Amanda's heart quickened. She rushed to meet her parents. When she saw her mother, everything would become simple and not scary. Her smile, her voice always drove away fears and worries. On the doorstep stood her father alone. Amanda felt disappointed. It had better be Mom. But it was good that at least Dad had come. He was more fun and less scary. But why is he so glum? His face is literally blank. And what's that alien look in his eyes? Where's Mom? Amanda asked. And then the father told his daughter the terrible truth, which the girl could not believe for a long time afterwards. It turned out that in the factory shop, where her mother worked, there was an accident. The boiler burst. There was a fire. Not everyone was saved. Amanda's mom was among the dead. Then there were funerals, but Amanda was not taken to them, left with neighbors. They thought that she was too young for such shocks. It was as if the girl had been turned off. For several years she could not smile and almost did not speak. She studied, ate, went to school, even it seems, played with her friends. But she did everything by inertia, machine-like. Amanda herself still remembered her feelings well. It seemed to her that she was in an unreal imaginary world, where everything was not real. That's why she didn't feel anything, a protective reaction of her body. I guess her father was doing the best he could to take care of his daughter. But he wasn't very good at it. Dad couldn't cook, but he was good at frying potatoes. He couldn't braid Amanda's hair either. Honestly, he tried. But they came out sloppy and smelly. In the end, Amanda had to learn to do a lot of things on her own. A kind neighbor, Aunt Lucy, her mother's friend, told her something and she did it herself. Domestic problems distracted Amanda a little and even relieved her condition. Fatigue drowned out the heartache, and yet the girl was very longing. So long that it is impossible to express in words. At night she cried quietly into her pillow, so as not to disturb her father. He promised to take her to a doctor if she didn't come to her senses. But Amanda didn't want to see a doctor, so she put up with it. Gradually, life fell into a familiar pattern. It became less pleasant, less cozy and bright. But there was still room for joy and pleasure in her life. Amanda had desires, dreams, and feelings. It was as if she was revitalized, strengthened, made stronger. And then, 2 years after the tragic events, Amber, the stepmother, appeared in the house. Her father worked as a driver at the bakery, delivering products to stores and stores, sometimes taking his daughter on trips. Amanda loved sitting in the high cab, looking down on the cars. What did it smell like in there? The aroma of fresh baked goods was unmatched. Amber worked as a clerk at one of the outlets her father operated. That's how they met. At first, Amber seemed like a kind, warm-hearted woman, smiling, attentive homemaker. What about her cooking? Oh my God. Pancakes, pies, borscht. Amanda learned a lot from her. The girl was happy. Of course, no one could replace her mother, but a woman's hand in their house was definitely lacking. True, the neighbor Lucy from the very beginning was inclined to Amber cool, to put it mildly. Amanda noticed this dislike of her mom's friend and didn't understand the reason. Then Michael was born. Amanda was happy. She had once dreamed of a brother. The girl helped Amber with everything. Her big sister was a joy to be around, but her stepmother's attitude toward her help had changed. She began to be annoyed by things that before she did not even pay attention to. Why buy old clothes? Do you still have a closet full? Amber reprimanded her spouse. Michael needs a new fall suit. He's growing up fast. Why didn't your daughter do the dishes? What am I, the maid, cleaning up after all of you? I have a baby in my arms. I don't have time. The stepmother would get angry another time, and so on. It got to the point where Amanda tried to avoid seeing the woman again, so as not to cause a new outburst of irritation and aggression. But it didn't help. Amber always found something to pick on. And it was hard not to have contact in a cramped two-room apartment. Stepmother, father, and baby lived in the living room. Amanda had her own tiny but cozy and, most importantly, separate room. Here the girl felt in relative peace and safety. Only a year after Michael's appearance in the family was born another child, Tamati, and the eldest son was immediately moved into the nursery to Amanda. Now she had to neighbor with a 1.5-year-old baby, who invariably threw her textbooks and notebooks and cried a lot at night. But Amanda was not allowed to complain. Her father would support her stepmother, and she would be completely on her son's side. So she had to bear it. Moreover, sooner or later you get used to everything. When Tamati grew up a little, he was also moved into the nursery. The parents bought the boys bunk beds, which occupied the entire wall. Along the other wall stood Amanda's sofa. There was a desk under the window. There was no room for anything else in the room. Cramped but not cramped, Amber said of the nursery. She also dreamed of the time when Amanda would finally grow up and move away, either to study in another city or get married. I don't think we'll be able to get a bigger apartment, Amber reasoned. Times are hard, but Amanda's already a bride, and when she leaves, the place will be free, and the boys will have more room. And so will we. These dreams of her stepmother, spoken aloud, made the girl feel even more unnecessary and unloved. And the father? He did not even object to his wife, as if he too thought that Amanda's presence alone prevented everyone from living. Amanda finished 9 grades and entered a school to become a pastry chef. She wanted to become independent sooner, to get a job, rent an apartment, and move away from her family, who considered her a burden. Amanda had a group of wonderful girls. She immediately made friends with Lucy, a small, cheerful, carefree, and completely good-natured girl. It was easy and pleasant to communicate with her. Once Amanda had a person with whom she could share her worries. Emily pitied her friend, scolded her stepmother, and very often invited Amanda to her house. Emily lived in a spacious apartment with her grandmother. The girl had never seen her father, and her mother was building a personal life somewhere on the side. In some ways, the fates of girlfriends were similar. Both of them did not know parental love. But Emily was luckier. She had a caring grandmother who did not care about her granddaughter. At the beginning of summer was Emily's birthday, her coming of age, and the girl decided to celebrate not anywhere, but in a nightclub. I've never been to such a place before. Emily's eyes were burning with impatience. I'm 18, and I've never been to a club before. Neither have I, Amanda admitted. This is ridiculous. We need to fix this right now. And so the girls found themselves in a nightclub. All that music, the ear-splitting bass, the crowd of young people on the dance floor. The girls were a little confused at first. I wanted to go home right away, Amanda admitted, but Emily held her back. Wait, we haven't understood anything yet. What if we like it? Emily firmly dragged her friend to a vacant table. I think they ordered a pizza and a Coke. They didn't get drinks. Not you, or I have never had a drink before, Amanda said reasonably. I don't know what it'll do to us. And we're all alone here, Emily agreed. The girls went to the dance floor. The cheerful Emily blended right in with the crowd. She caught the rhythm and began to dance naturally and harmoniously. But Amanda felt constrained and awkward, tried to make some movements with her hands and feet, but seemed ridiculous to herself. It was good that it was dark, noisy and crowded. Hardly anyone paid attention to her. But Amanda was wrong. In fact, James was already following her. Only the girl didn't even realize it at the time. He was attracted by Amanda's differentness from the others. The girls from the club are all the same. Nothing new, nothing interesting. I've already looked at all of them. And then suddenly this modest and beautiful, incredibly slender, long-legged, a natural beauty. But how could I pass her up? James approached Amanda's table when she was alone. Emily was on the dance floor, oblivious to the world and looking very happy. Amanda, on the other hand, was still kind of uncomfortable, awkward, uncomfortable, but she didn't want to ruin her friend's party. Let her have fun. Birthday girl. Amanda sat at the table, looking at the people dancing. It was interesting to look at the outfits and hairstyles of the girls, the faces of the guys. There was a lot of people here, both green school children and people of almost parental age. "Excuse me, can I sit down?" Amanda heard. She shifted her gaze to the person speaking. It was a handsome guy in a tight black t-shirt, emphasizing the relief of muscles and obviously not cheap jeans. The young man was looking directly at Amanda and smiling openly. "Do you mind if I sit down?" The stranger repeated his question. "No, of course not," Amanda said. "Good." The guy smiled even wider and sat down directly opposite Emily's seat. "My name is James. I've been watching you for a long time. I thought I'd introduce myself." Amanda was embarrassed. She had no experience with the opposite sex. At school, boys didn't pay much attention to Amanda. They chose more colorful and risky girls. And Amanda was always quiet, modest. She was afraid to say an extra word. And in college, they didn't have any guys in their group. And now a young man wants to meet her. He likes her. How is that possible? And the guy's handsome, confident, and apparently not poor. Amanda had no idea how to talk to him, although she really wanted to. But James acted like they'd known each other forever, talking about things, joking, complimenting Amanda. And soon the girl's shyness was gone. Amanda didn't notice how she got involved in the conversation. She laughed at the jokes of her charming interlocutor, answered his questions, listened to stories from James's cheerful student life. The guy studied at the best university in the city at a prestigious law school. He was also involved in sports. He was a member of the university volleyball team. Lived with his parents in an apartment in the city center. He worked part-time at a pizzeria as a cook's assistant and drove his own car. Amanda stared into his cheerful eyes of an amazing emerald hue and felt like she was falling in love, for the first time in her life. A racing heartbeat, lightheadedness, a desire to be as close to him as possible. Weren't those the signs of falling in love? James was drawn to Amanda too. The girl could feel it and see it in his interested gaze. The guy was showering her with compliments. Amanda couldn't believe her happiness. And she was desperately afraid to disappoint her new acquaintance, to say something wrong or do something. In fact, she was terrified of pushing James away. "Oh, it's your friend." It wasn't Emily who came back to the table. It was Amanda. She'd already forgotten that she'd come to the nightclub with a friend. It seemed that the perceptive Emily understood everything from her friend's eyes. James, the guy, introduced himself and immediately stood up, giving way to the girl. "Wow, what a gallant, a real gentleman." Emily marveled. "I'm actually on my way out." She looked at Amanda questioningly. She understood her friend's look. Emily wondered if she was the third extra, asking if it was time for her to leave. Amanda didn't know what to say to her friend. On the one hand, she didn't want to leave James, to be here alone with him. What could be more wonderful? On the other hand, it wasn't an easy decision to make, because, well, it was just scary. Honestly, this was the first time Amanda was seeing this man. What would James think of her if she agreed to be alone with a guy she didn't even know? And James understood the girl's hesitation. Amazing sensitivity. "I could drive you both home," he offered. "Only on the condition that Amanda leave me her phone number." The girl smiled. He would drive them both. That's a whole different matter. And James also asks for her phone number. But of course she will gladly give him those numbers. James' car was parked in the wide parking lot in front of the club. A black Chevrolet Cruze, not an expensive foreign car, but quite a nice car for a young guy. Amanda rejoiced. Lucky James wasn't rich. The guy drove the girls to Emily's house. Tonight Amanda had a sleepover at her friend's house. The parents had been warned about it in advance. Emily went out first. For a moment Amanda and James were left alone in the cabin. The guy took advantage of this and took Amanda's palm in his hand and brought it to his lips. It was a very gallant kiss that filled Amanda's heart with light and warmth. "I'll be sure to call you tomorrow," James said. Amanda will be waiting for him to leave. Emily pounced on her friend with questions. She was curious to know how Amanda had gotten her hands on the handsome man. "I don't know," Amanda shrugged. "He picked me somehow." "Lucky you," Emily sighed. "I was making eyes at a guy on the dance floor, but he didn't even pay attention to me." "You'll get there," Amanda smiled. And then she added, "I'm just afraid he won't call me back." "He will," she said confidently. "The way he was looking at you. If someone looked at me like that, I'd be so happy." Emily was right. James did call back the next morning and invited Amanda to the movies. It was the opening night of another big superhero blockbuster. And there, in the darkness of the auditorium, James kissed Amanda for the first time. The girl even felt dizzy. She didn't know how to behave in such a situation. It was her first kiss. James seemed to realize that. "What about you? Were you seeing anyone else before me?" he asked, pulling back slightly and looking into Amanda's eyes. "No," she said, embarrassed. "Well, that's it." Now James would realize how ridiculous and worthless she was. She was almost 18, and she hadn't even been on a real date yet. There must be something wrong with her. Who would want her like that? But to Amanda's surprise, the negative answer pleased James. His eyes shone with joy. A wide smile lit up his face. He suddenly put his arms around Amanda gently and pulled her close to him. The girl felt his heart beating and melted with happiness. Some events were unfolding on the screen, but the meaning of the movie kept slipping away from Amanda. He was there. James put his arm around her shoulders, stroked her hair from time to time, and sometimes he looked at her silently and smiled at her. They often met, went to cafes and movies, went on rides, just wandered around the picturesque streets and neighborhoods. Sometimes James would take Amanda out of town. He knew so much about so many things. Young people then went to the waterfalls, then to the mountain with flowering plants. It turns out that in the vicinity of his hometown, a lot of interesting and beautiful. And Amanda had no idea. "You have a boyfriend now." "And I'm still alone," Emily envied her friend a little. "You'll have a boyfriend, too," Amanda replied. "Maybe, but when? You have a boyfriend now, and I'm still alone, with no one to go out with." So Amanda was a little embarrassed to tell her friend about her meetings with James, each of which turned into a magical adventure. Why would she want to hurt Emily's feelings? Happiness loves silence. Amanda didn't know where she'd first heard that beautiful expression, but she thought they were very wise words. Amanda finally felt loved. It turned out to be an incredibly pleasant feeling. James took care of her, opening the car door in front of her, giving her something to eat all the time. And if it got chilly, he took off his jacket and threw it over Amanda's shoulders. He was so sensitive, so attentive. James seemed to pick up on any change in the girl's mood and anticipate her desires. Love, support, attention. Amanda lacked it in her family. And here comes a guy who enveloped her with warmth, like a cotton blanket. Of course, James quickly became for her the most native and close person. Sometimes at night in bed, Amanda couldn't sleep and thought about how she had lived without James. Too bad James was a very busy young man. School, work, and his grandmother in the village, to whom he often traveled with groceries. The guy couldn't spend as much time with Amanda as she would have liked. By the way, he often regretted it out loud. "Baby, I want to hold you in my arms and hold you 24 hours a day. You are so amazing, but I have so much to do, my head is spinning sometimes." Amanda, lying in James's arms, understood. She felt sorry for the guy. He must be very tired, running around like a squirrel in a wheel. But he seemed to like the active life. That's good, too. Her father and stepmother didn't notice the change in Amanda's behavior. They did not see the happy glint in her eyes and thought that the girl spent a lot of time with her friend. One day, during a safety lecture, Amanda suddenly felt sick. It was early morning, the first class. The girl was groggy from the morning. But then the teacher suddenly spoke about the smell of raw fish, and Amanda felt it. Her eyes even darkened. No, she rushed for the exit. She had to make it. And Amanda did. How could she vomit? She'd never been like this before. "What's wrong with you?" Lucy came to ask. "You look so pale." "I was sent to see if you were all right." "I think I'm fine," Amanda smiled. She suddenly felt strangely weak. Even her knees trembled. "Are you pregnant by any chance?" Emily asked. "No, I'm not." Amanda shook her head negatively and suddenly thought about it. It was entirely possible. It was unlikely, of course, but not impossible. Her stomach suddenly felt cold. Cold from the sudden realization. Emily said confidently. "No," Amanda admitted. "Then take the test." "I don't know why not." "I'm afraid," Amanda admitted honestly. On the way home, she stopped by the drugstore and bought a test. Something inside her told her that the result would be positive. Amanda had almost no doubts about it, and she was right. The test showed 2 bright stripes. It was a good thing no one was home at that time. Her brothers at school, her parents at work. Amanda shakily made her way to her couch and collapsed on it. Tears rolled from her eyes. The girl could not understand her own feelings. On the one hand, her heart was overflowing with joy and tenderness. She had a baby under her heart, a very real baby. Her baby, hers and James's. What a beautiful and wonderful creature it must be. On the other hand, Amanda didn't feel ready for motherhood. She wasn't even 18 yet. She wouldn't turn 18 until next month. No profession obtained, no job. What's she going to do with a baby? She's not ready. But the baby has a father. James, on the other hand, is doing just fine. He's studying, working, even owns his own car. His parents have a big apartment. He's mentioned it many times. I'm sure there's plenty of room for everyone. So it would seem. All the conditions for the creation of a family are there. But how would James take this news? Amanda was very worried about that question. It seems that the guy sincerely loves her, gives gifts, tends to spend any free minute with her. There are not many of them in his busy life. There was only one way to test it. Amanda would always remember that evening. James had invited her for an evening stroll along the waterfront. Dusk had already fallen. The light of the lanterns gave the setting a special charm. James held Amanda's hand. They walked in silence along the parapet behind which the wide river carried its waters. Quiet, calm, majestic. There was a nice fresh breeze. The first stars appeared in the sky. I need to talk to you." Amanda decided that there was no point in waiting any longer. She had tried to tell James about their baby several times before, but she hadn't had the courage. Now he would finally find out, give her a hug, a smile, a little scolding for her indecision. And everything would be fine. About what? James was still smiling nonchalantly. He couldn't imagine what he would hear in a few seconds. "James, I mean, we're having a baby." Amanda sucked in a breath. There was a heavy pause. Amanda stared into James's eyes, trying to figure out what he was feeling right now, and she didn't see any joyful emotions on the boy's face. Finally, he sighed heavily. "Are you sure?" Yes, Amanda nodded. "Several tests have already come back positive." "What's the timing of all this?" The boy looked puzzled and upset. Seeing that look on his face, almost squeamish, was very painful for Amanda. The girl's eyes suddenly filled with tears. With a willful effort, she chased them back. "What are you going to do?" James looked at Amanda and waited for an answer. The girl shrugged her shoulders. She had hoped it would be James who would tell her what to do, reassure her and support her. But he seemed to be as confused and scared as she was. There was no trace of his usual confidence. Right before Amanda's eyes, he was transformed. The adult, all-powerful James, capable of solving any problem, disappeared. And in his place was a boy green, inexperienced, a coward. "You're pathetic, even." Amazing metamorphosis, Amanda thought. "So how do you plan to deal with it?" James repeated his question. Amanda let go of her boyfriend's hand. He didn't want a serious relationship. This naive girl was already starting to bore him. At first, her enthusiasm, her ability to enjoy the little things had attracted and mesmerized James. Amanda looked at him with such eyes that he felt strong and omnipotent. It was an interesting experience. He'd never met a girl like her before, but gradually it bored him. James was once again drawn to bright, bold beauties. He planned to break up with Amanda gradually over the next 2 weeks, without scandals or hard feelings. And then she said it. "I'm pregnant." James pulled away involuntarily, as if he wanted to run away. No, Amanda shook her head. "We have to have an abortion." James seized on the thought. Money wasn't a problem. The term was short. It would be quick and easy. "We'll go to the clinic tomorrow. I'm about to turn 18. Minors will tell their parents and they'll kill me," Amanda reminded him. "If you don't, they'll kill you," James insisted. "It's going to be noticeable soon anyway," Amanda shook her head. "I have time to think of something, but we can't let anyone find out now." "You're insane," James said. "And sneaky. From a poor family? Maybe it's a way to make money." Amanda stared at him in amazement. How ugly he looked. Could she really fall in love with someone like that? "It's not going to work," he said. "My aunt works in the court. She will make the documents. And you won't be able to prove that the child is mine. Maybe it's not mine at all." Amanda sighed heavily, turned around and walked away. Away from James and his hurtful, nasty words. The voice of the man she had recently loved with all her soul came through. "Get out of here so I don't have to see you. I'll never recognize him, do you hear me? You can't prove anything. If you try, I'll crush you." Amanda didn't doubt that James had the strength to crush her. But she wasn't going to fight him, and she didn't even want to see him now. The prince had turned out to be a coward and a scoundrel. Amanda was almost running down the embankment. The blood was pounding in her temples, an unpleasant chill spread through her body. At some point, she noticed the wary glances of passers-by and realized that her face was wet with tears. She felt an unbearable pain in her solar plexus. For a moment, she stopped thinking about the baby. Her disappointment had overshadowed her, and her soul was dark and disgusting. Had all of James's words, his reassurances, his tender glances and kisses been lies? That evening, Amanda walked about 10 kilometers home, not even noticing the distance. She tried to concentrate on her steps, seemingly counting them to distract herself from her heavy thoughts. In front of the apartment door, Amanda wiped her tears and smoothed her hair. She had to look normal, so her stepmother and father wouldn't suspect anything. It wasn't hard. They usually paid little attention to her. The stepmother was in the kitchen. The father was humming in the bathroom. Michael and Tamati were playing a console in the living room. The room was vacant, wonderful. Amanda collapsed on the couch, turned her back to the wall, and instantly fell into a sound sleep. The morning is ancient in the evening. Tomorrow, surely she'd think of something. But Amber didn't think of tomorrow, or the day after tomorrow, or the day after tomorrow, or the week after. Amanda went to school as usual. Summer vacation wasn't over yet, but students had to attend a special block of lectures before their last course. "But what are we going to do?" Emily, the only one who knew about Amanda's situation, often asked, unless you counted James, who had probably forgotten about the whole thing like a bad dream by now. "I have no idea," the girl shrugged. "I'll figure something out." Thither time went on and still no solution was found. The morning sickness had disappeared somewhere, and Amanda sometimes now even forgot that she was carrying a child under her heart. She felt nothing at all. Sometimes the thought even crept into her head, maybe the tests are all lies, but it can't be that a pregnant woman feels completely normal, can it? What about mood swings, strange taste preferences, rabid appetite? August came to an end, September flew by. And then one gloomy, chilly October morning, Amanda realized she couldn't button her favorite, and only neat jeans at the waist. Her stomach had grown, it seemed, overnight. Just like that, almost instantaneously. Amanda lifted up her shirt and scrutinized herself in the mirror. Yes, she definitely looked pregnant now. No matter how hard the girl tried, she couldn't get that belly in. Tears came to her eyes. Her head snapped up. Well, this is it. Now everyone will see. Everyone will realize what she's done, and why Amanda took so long to do anything about it. Why didn't she listen to James and go to the hospital in time? Honestly, she'd thought everything would sort itself out. Foolish and naive to believe such a thing. But the girl still hoped that the tests were wrong, or that the pregnancy would suddenly stop developing. Foolish, unsupported dreams. Now Amanda realized how carelessly she had behaved in a difficult situation, hid her head in the sand, like a stupid ostrich. The reason for that could have been those pregnancy hormones. And fear, of course. Fear of parents, of doctors, of the future. And now the falling belly reminded Amanda that the problem wasn't going anywhere, and she couldn't put it off any longer. Even if she continued to keep quiet, they would notice. The first, of course, would be the stepmother. She'll say to the father, "God, how can I live with myself?" That morning, Amanda walked to the school with her jeans unbuttoned. No one noticed. She wore a long, wide t-shirt on top. If only everything else was as easy to fix, she thought. And then there was Emily not being around. A friend was sick. She'd had heart problems since childhood. Suddenly, at the end of the summer, it had gotten worse. Emily was taken to the capital for surgery. The friend will be there for at least 2 or 3 months, if not longer. She even took a leave of absence from school. Amanda was worried about her friend. They talked every night, supporting each other. And yet the absence of the only understanding and kind-hearted person at such a moment was an additional challenge for Amanda. On that gray, overcast October day, Amanda returned from school in a gloomy mood. As always, she found on the refrigerator a list of things to do from her stepmother: wipe the floors, cook dinner, buy some groceries. But today the girl had no energy even for these household chores. On the morning of her first class, Amanda felt the baby inside her move. In the first moment, she experienced non-rational feelings: tenderness, joy, love. It seemed, in general, some kind of warmth for the baby that was growing inside her. And then a very different emotion came over her. Amanda finally realized that inside her was a living person with arms, legs, and heart, and maybe even with feelings. This is a huge responsibility, unbearable for Amanda. She can't even tell her parents about this person. Still hasn't made up her mind. What kind of mother is she for the rest of the day? The girl remained in gloomy silence. No one touched Amanda much. She saw no way out. Life seemed a burden. The people around her were cold, indifferent, evil. And in this world she wants to bring a child. What can such a mother give her? Nothing, not even basic protection. And now, sitting in an empty, quiet apartment, Amanda thought over the decision. A terrible, irrevocable, but, it seems, the only right one. The girl was overcome with doubts. Of course, it was not easy to take such a step. But the more she thought about her situation, the more she was convinced that she had to act. What's the point of staying here? She asked herself. My father doesn't need me, and my stepmother doesn't need me. She'd be glad to have a place for her own beloved children. Even James, who had once seemed so loving and caring, had betrayed her. How can anyone ever be trusted? Amanda is alone in this whole world, and no one will ever help her. Except Emily. But she needs support herself. Bad things happen to mostly good people, to people who don't deserve it. To keep herself from changing her mind, Amanda got up from her cozy couch and walked outside in what she was wearing. It was pouring rain. The homemade shorts and t-shirt were clearly not appropriate for the weather. Amanda could see goosebumps on her bare arms and legs, but somehow she didn't feel cold. The girl knew where she was going. There was only one place in their neighborhood suitable for Amanda's plan: a new building, a 16-story building. They say it has spacious apartments with high ceilings and big windows. Must be nice to live in a place like that. And here's Amanda standing outside this building, looking up. It's not hard to climb up the fire escape to the roof. And then, scary. But where do you go? Strangers were rushing past. Some glanced at Amanda with indifferent eyes. Others did not notice a teenage girl freezing in the October rain in summer shorts and a t-shirt. Everyone has their own business, everyone has their own worries. What to speak of strangers, if even her own father didn't care about Amanda? Child, are you all right? Amanda shuddered with surprise when she heard a dry and at the same time concerned voice. The girl turned around and met the gaze of worried light blue eyes. Before her stood an old woman in a long cloak. Small, thin, slightly hunched, pale. Thin strands of gray hair were poking out from under her gray shawl. What? Amanda didn't understand. She was far away from here now. Her heart clenched with fear. Her legs were stiff and she was shivering. What are you up to? As if the old woman had read the girl's thoughts. Come to my place. I'll warm you with tea, and you'll tell me everything. Amanda wanted to refuse, but the old woman spoke in a tone that did not tolerate objections, confident and at the same time kind and affectionate. She looked at Amanda with sympathy and curiosity. She cared. The stranger really wanted to know what misfortune had befallen this young girl. And it wasn't idle interest. Amanda felt that the old woman wanted to help her. Amazing. Amazing. Could this really happen? Amanda obediently followed the old woman. She was saying something as she walked and kept looking back, as if checking to see if the strange girl was following her. Only when she was in the old woman's small, clean apartment did Amanda realize that she was very cold. The warmth took her into its embrace, gave her a feeling of security and satisfaction. Amanda suddenly remembered what she had just wanted to do and shuddered. Now the thought seemed terribly wrong. "Come into the kitchen," the old woman smiled and gestured to the table. "What kind of tea do you like, black or green?" "Black with milk, please, if I may." "Why not?" The old woman put the kettle on the stove, took out dishes and simple food from the cupboard, store cookies, wafers, cheap candies, homemade jam. All of it was soothing to Amanda. She relaxed, felt pleasantly sleepy. It felt so good here. An island of calm and comfort in the middle of a gray, crazy world. "Well, everything is ready," the old woman said. Amanda finally finished setting the table and sat down across from her guest. "Now tell me what your trouble is." Lucy was embarrassed. She wanted to open up to this kind woman, but what would she think when she found out? Judgment, of course. Of that there was no doubt. Lucy was afraid to tell even her own family. And people of the older generation are even more categorical in such matters. "Don't be embarrassed or afraid of anything," sighed the old woman. "By the way, I don't think I introduced myself. My name is Pamela, and you're Amanda? That's a wonderful name. It's what I wanted to name my daughter. I've dreamed of having kids my whole life, but it never came true. I haven't dreamed yet, but I have," Amanda confessed to herself. Realizing that there was no retreat, she added, "I'm expecting a baby. And I just turned 18. My boyfriend left me. And I can't tell my parents. That's all." Now the old lady will condemn her and throw her out on the street. Maybe she'll give her a lecture on morality first. And she'd be right, by the way. Amanda really is stupid and unscrupulous to be in this situation. But Pamela suddenly did something completely unexpected. She walked over to Amanda and hugged her tightly and very gently. And then Amanda couldn't take it anymore. All the worries and fears of the last few days began to come out of her with tears and sobs. The old woman soothingly stroked her back with her hard, dry palm and said something softly. Amanda couldn't make out all the words, but Pamela seemed to be telling her not to hold back and to cry as much as she needed to. When the tears dried up, Amanda, to her surprise, felt better. Strength and energy came from somewhere. Even breathing became easier. "That's good." Pamela smiled at her, returning to her seat. "Sometimes you need to cry. Now tell me more about it. We'll see what we can do to help you." Amanda smiled at the kind old woman. Was there really one person in the world who wanted to help her? It was true, she wasn't alone anymore. Amanda took a deep breath and told Pamela everything about her mother who had left so early, about her stepmother and father, and about James. Of course, he was especially hard to remember. Amanda also mentioned Amber, who was now in a hospital 100 kilometers away. Pamela listened without interrupting. Amanda could see in her face that the old woman was not judging her guest. She pities, sympathizes, worries, but definitely remains on the girl's side. Amanda felt Pamela's support and approval, and it gave her strength and confidence. That was it. Amanda finished her story. "So why did you come here? To the high rise?" Pamela frowned. Amanda lowered her eyes. Now she was afraid to admit what she had wanted to do only 40 minutes ago. But the old woman seemed to understand. "You're just like me," she said suddenly, and shook her head. "I was in the same situation too, and I didn't see any way out. I didn't want to live. So girl, don't think that you are alone. And don't blame yourself for anything. You fell in love? Lost your head? Who doesn't? Especially since you don't see affection and care at home. So your heart went out to this James. And he's a coward. What can you do?" Amanda looked at Pamela in surprise. The old woman had managed to express so clearly in words what she felt. She'd only gotten involved with James because she'd been missing his affection, care, and attention for a long time, ever since her mother had passed away. It seemed to Amanda that now, finally, she wasn't alone. She had James. She wanted it so badly that she probably didn't pay attention to the alarm bells. Were there any? Of course there were. I've been in the same situation myself, Pamela sighed. Had you? Amanda had forgotten her own distress for a moment. Would you tell me? Pamela grinned. It was a difficult story for her. But the girls sitting in front of her now, it was important to hear it. Perhaps fate itself had brought them together. It was no coincidence that Amanda had gotten in Pamela's way at the right and crucial moment. No, the old woman was sure that the girl would not have committed this terrible act. Most likely she would have come to her senses on the way to the roof or standing on the edge. Pamela saw in Amanda's eyes that she wanted to live and had even managed to love her baby. Yes, the girl was in a difficult position, but it would all pass. And fears and pain will not be easy. And yet there are many good things ahead for Amanda. The girl will realize this once she calms down a little. Pamela's story should help Amanda calm down, at least for a confused girl. It will be interesting to hear the story of someone who has had to experience the same things she herself has. Pamela had it harder, I think. Times were different. A lot more was required of girls then than it is now. Tell me, Amanda asked, looking at Pamela curiously. It won't take long. Do you have time? I do now. Amanda made herself comfortable in her chair and prepared to listen. Pamela was born in a small town to a large family. Her father and mother worked on the collective farm. Every morning they had to go to another town. Both of them returned late. Accordingly, the household and the younger children were in the care of the eldest daughter. The nimble and agile Pamela coped with everything playfully. She returned from school, quickly did her homework and began to do things to clean the floors, cook lunch and dinner, wash and hang the laundry. Work burned in young Pamela's hands. She even had time to go for a walk with her girlfriends before picking up the younger ones from daycare. Then you can't get away from the little ones. For such children need an eye, and an eye this Pamela learned very well. By her 15th birthday, the girl dreamed of being a teacher. Most of all, she liked math and physics. These were the subjects she wanted to teach children when she grew up. Teachers praised the clever student and predicted a great future for her. And so it turned out in the end. But at what cost? It happened so that in a neighboring town died sister of Pamela's father. A very young woman's heart failed. The head of the family died at the front a few years ago, so that the children were left round orphans. There were 4 of them. Neighborhood children decided to distribute among relatives, and the eldest daughter, 15-year-old Emma, was given to Pamela's family. Emma seemed to be the same age as Pamela. But friendship between the girls did not work. 2 different characters. Cheerful, quick-witted Pamela and slow, thoughtful Emma seemed somehow different, and they had nothing to talk about. Emma, unlike her cousin, was not very eager to study. But she was a wonderful hostess who could cook complicated dishes and clean so well that everything sparkled. Emma had no patience for clutter, and she put things in their proper places. It was like it was in her blood. To herself, Emma didn't seem overly affluent, carefree, unserious. And she was always making remarks to her sister. She dusted the wrong way, washed the dishes too long, and kneaded the dough the wrong way. This irritated Pamela, which of course did not contribute to the strengthening of relations between the sisters. Parents also added oil to the fire. They constantly set Emma as an example to their eldest daughter. Look how clever Emma is, praised her niece mother. Such a wife to anyone for happiness. And what about me? Pamela was indignant. I do my chores too, and look after the children and clean. I've managed without her before. How am I any worse? You laugh too loudly and answer too much, said the father. How it annoyed young Pamela. But there was a great advantage to Emma's arrival. Now the girls shared the household chores equally, and Pamela had more free time to go out with her friends. Emma had no desire to go out. She hadn't made friends with anyone from the neighborhood. So the girl quietly let her cousin Emma go out in the evenings and looked after the little ones. Okay, go, Emma sighed every time I left her, she grumbled. Sister's just for show. In fact, she was even glad to stay, at least for a while, as mistress of the house. Oh, those evenings young Pamela needed them. Evenings were the best time. Pamela still recalled with nostalgia her walks through Nashville in the company of teenagers like herself. The things they did. They played like kids, slid down snowy mountains, played soccer, jumped over the fire, and swam in the river after sunset, despite their parents' prohibitions. It was fun and good fun. Adults watched the fun of boys and girls with a smile. Probably they remembered the time when they were like that themselves. Sometimes one of the men even joined the noisy company, which caused laughter and approval of teenagers. One of those men was sometimes Ben. He had not lived in Nashville for a long time, but he often visited his parents who remained here. Ben himself at one time went to study in the city and stayed there, as happened to many. It was said that Ben worked at a big factory and had already reached the position of a shop manager. He had his own apartment and a brand new red car. But he didn't get married. This fact bothered the locals a lot. Women tried to match the enviable groom with their daughters and nieces. Ben's mother lamented and dreamed aloud of grandchildren. Only Ben himself was in no hurry to marry. In his own words, he was doing quite well as it was. Ben at that moment was already about 30 years old. A grown man, almost old by the standards of 15-year-old Pamela. But he was nothing like the people of that age the girl knew. First, Ben dressed fashionably and stylishly. Secondly, he joked a lot, laughed, and generally behaved relaxed and carefree. Here and with teenagers did not bother to race the ball. Many girls from the company were in love with him. Some of them talked about it directly, and some of them didn't even need to admit it. Everything became noticeable by the looks they threw at Ben. Ben liked talking to young people. That evening, the man spent the late afternoon playing ball with the teenagers. Pamela, daydreaming as always, secretly admired his deft, precise movements. Ben sometimes caught her eye, and then the girl shamefully lowered her eyes. How handsome he was, and so different from the natives. Like a man from another world. But why? How is he from another world, the city? It's a different life there. Yes, Pamela had been to the city several times. The smart, wide streets, the motley crowd of people rushing somewhere. Squares, fountains, beautiful parks. This splendor even made the girl dizzy. Life in the city was like a never-ending holiday. Ben touched Pamela a few times that evening accidentally. During the game, it was as if a lightning bolt struck her at those moments. He didn't seem to notice. When it got dark, the teens went to a bench outside the neighborhood. It was their favorite gathering place. One of the boys would make a fire because it was dark here at this time. So they sat some on a bench, some on fallen trees, and some just on the grass. They told each other scary stories, discussed the events of the day, and dreamed. The atmosphere was pleasant and light. Yes, Pamela loved those hours. Then we slowly went home. Pamela was one of the first to leave. In her family, there was a strict rule to show up before midnight, even if tomorrow was a day off, and she didn't have to go to school. The girl could not disobey her parents. If she tried to do that, her mother and father would not let her out at all next time. They were strict. That night, Ben stayed with the boys. It wasn't surprising. It happened sometimes. The teenagers liked to hear him talk about his childhood. It's time to go, Pamela sighed, glancing at her wristwatch, a gift from her father. It was almost 12 o'clock at night. The friends sympathized and went back to their leisurely conversation. It was good for them to stay together around the fire, happy and carefree. Pamela didn't want to go home at all, but there was nothing to do. She walked through the deserted, dark streets of the village. It was quiet, very quiet. Only from the bench, now quite far away, the wind sometimes brought scraps of phrases and laughter. Large bright stars shone in the sky. The path was illuminated by the diffused light of the pale moon. Suddenly, Pamela heard light footsteps. Someone was catching up with her. The girl stopped and looked back. Ben was approaching her at a light trot. He was smiling at her and following her with purpose. Pamela's heart sank into her heels and her ears rattled. When she realized it, she still couldn't believe it. Now Ben will come up to me, and it will appear that there is some quite domestic reason why he is now hurrying after the young neighbor, thought the girl. You're fast, Ben said, either delighted or surprised as he approached Pamela. She lowered her eyes to the floor, embarrassed. It was a good thing it was dark outside and Ben couldn't see her flush. Otherwise, he'd have realized at once that Pamela was one of his many admirers. Are you going home already? The man asked. Pamela nodded affirmatively, still looking at the toes of her dusty sandals. Ben's proximity made her heart race, and she felt dizzy. They'd never been alone like this before, and there was no one else around. Her parents are waiting. My father scolds me if I'm home after 12, but he doesn't beat me, she said. Ben looked at Pamela with interest. No, but he swears. I see. My parents were strict too. Well, you'll grow up soon and you'll be your own boss. How old are you? Already 16. Almost, Pamela answered. Wow, already a bride. I remember you as a little girl. And now you're so beautiful. Ben scrutinized the girl very closely, as if groping her. He liked what he saw. Pamela was both pleased and a little afraid. You are really very beautiful, said the man. Pamela flashed to the roots of her hair and smiled. These words created some kind of magic. The girl really felt strong, mature, and incredibly beautiful. She squared her shoulders and finally dared to look into Ben's eyes. In them, Pamela saw sincere admiration and also interest. Ben was openly admiring her. A wave of unexplored sensations came over the girl, and she wanted him to touch her. Ben, as if guessing her thoughts, covered her shoulder with his palm. Pamela felt a wave of goosebumps run up her spine. Shall we walk to the river? Ben said hoarsely, keeping his gaze fixed on the girl. Under that gaze, Pamela felt like a queen, a goddess, the most beautiful woman on earth. She would have followed Ben to the ends of the earth for that feeling. Never mind that her father would give her a beating for being late. It's okay, he'll find something to complain about. She'd tell her parents later that she'd been sitting around the campfire with the boys and had forgotten the time. When Ben repeated his question about the walk to the river, Pamela smiled and nodded affirmatively. That's a good girl, said the man. His affirmative answer made him the happiest man in the universe. It turned out to be very pleasant to feel your power over a man, especially a man like Ben. He took the girl's hand gently and led her toward Poplar Street. Just beyond it began the hillside on which the village was situated, and at the foot of it flowed the quiet river Fedor. In the summer, Pamela used to splash in it almost every day with her friends. But that had been in the daytime. Now it was night. The moon shone in the sky, in the light of which everything seemed so unfamiliar, so magical and mysterious. Ben and Pamela sat down on a fallen tree that served as a local shop. You're a ravishingly beautiful girl. Ben looked at his companion without looking away. Pamela was not like the other girls. Her misdemeanors were different from the silly pranks of her friends. This Ben had realized not so long ago and had lost his peace ever since. His words made a great impression on Pamela. She had always known she was different from her girlfriends, always felt special. And now Ben had confirmed her hunch. But was it right to sit alone with a grown man at night by the river and listen to his compliments? Your eyes, your hair, your smile. You're perfect. I've never met anyone like you before, Ben said. Really, I'm embarrassed, Pamela finally admitted. I don't know what to say. And then Ben kissed her. It was so sudden that she didn't even have time to pull away. And then she didn't want to. I'm sorry I couldn't help myself, Ben said, looking at Pamela carefully. She smiled and kissed Ben herself. She decided to let it be. She would think about whether she was doing the right thing later. For now, the girl just wanted to enjoy this magical and absolutely fantastic moment. Ben is near. He likes him. And he doesn't just like him. This grown-up, handsome man is the dream of everyone in their town, down to 10-year-old girls. He chose her. It all happened right on the beach. Pamela didn't realize it at first, and then it was too late to leave, and she didn't want to. To be honest, it hurt a little. It was good that it was over quickly. The girl hoped she had behaved properly. Ben smiled, stroked her hair, took out a pack of cigarettes and smoked. Would you like one? He offered one to Pamela. She shook her head negatively. Now she felt stupid and constrained. What to say, how to behave. Ben had better take the initiative again. Are you all right? Are you okay? He finally asked. Pamela nodded. All sorts of thoughts were running through her mind. It appeared that Ben's feelings for her were very serious. He would probably take her back to the city with him now. They would live in his apartment. It's going to take some getting used to. It probably won't be easy, but Ben will help her. He's such a strong, confident adult. You can't be afraid of anything. Pamela will be like a stone wall behind him. The main thing is that Ben loves her. He won't be as indifferent and irritable as her parents, but will surround her with love and care. The way he was looking at her. Don't tell anyone. Ben squeezed himself out. It was like an ice-cold gush of water. The voice of the man who just half an hour ago had been staring at her with admiring eyes now sounded cold and indifferent. I won't, Pamela replied. That's right. And even if you did, no one would believe you. Why not? Pamela wondered what had happened to make Ben change so suddenly. Maybe she'd done something wrong. But the man understood the question in his own way. Do you want to know why no one will believe you? He grinned. Well, think about it. Everyone in town knows that all the local girls are in love with me. And not just girls, but older ladies too. There's a lot of rumors about me around here. The ladies make up stories, one more interesting than the other. But no one believes them for a long time. Pamela nodded. Ben was right. Even if she told what had happened, no one would believe her. They'd think she was just another lovesick fool dreaming about him, sharing her fantasies. So it's best to keep quiet or they'll laugh. Why? She did ask a question. Why of all the girls in their company had Ben gone after her? He must have had feelings for her. She wanted to hear again that she was special. No reason. Ben smiled. You just happened to fall into his lap. He patted Pamela on the shoulder and walked up the slope. The man climbed easily and very quickly. Pamela sat on the bank for a while, thinking about what had happened. Tears ran down her cheeks. She had already believed that happiness was near. She had even begun to think of herself as an incredible beauty. To think that in her mind Pamela had already moved to the city, to Ben's apartment. You've got to be such a fool. She wasn't special, and if she was, it was in a bad way. I don't think any of her friends could have gotten into such a mess. And Pamela? She's hanging her ears, feeling like her favorite fool. But there was no turning back the clock, and the girl made a decision that seemed to her at that moment the only right one. She forgot about what had happened, hid the events of that evening in the hidden corners of her memory. There was nothing, that's all. At home, the girl got it from her father. She patiently listened to her parents moralizing. She was not even shaken by another comparison with Emma, who had long since slept in her bed. Why take offense at the truth? Her father was right, that's just the way it was. Since then, she hadn't been drawn to the outdoors anymore. No, she hadn't become despondent or fearful. She just didn't want to go to her friends because she might meet Ben, and she didn't want that at all. It was too painful, too hard, and Pamela would feel dirty and stupid around him. After all, he knew her secret, he did, and now he saw her through completely different eyes. The parents did not notice any change in their eldest daughter. They were too busy with work, household chores, fiddling with the kids. But Emma, sensitive Emma, immediately suspected something. One day the cousin couldn't bear to ask her directly. What happened that night? I can tell something's wrong. Your face is gone. Did you have a fight with your friends? Golden untruths were spilled. You guys fight all the time, but you make up all the time. This is different. You haven't set foot outside in 2 weeks. And before that, you couldn't stay indoors for a day. So Pamela went off the deep end and told Emma everything. Even though they were not friends, but the cousin will not betray and will not run to tell everyone about what she found out. Emma was reliable and serious, though she was a bore, of course. Pamela wanted to share her misfortune with someone. Telling her sister made her feel better. The relief was instantaneous, but now Emma was frowning and thinking hard. You do realize it's a crime, she said at last. What? But what he did. He belongs in prison. You're a minor, a child, and he's a grown man who took advantage of your inexperience. Pamela didn't see her story that way. And it's not your fault, Emma continued. You're just a teenager. It's his fault. That's why he told you to keep quiet. Pamela nodded. Emma was right. Then, sitting on the riverbank, she blamed herself. She'd thought herself stupid, naive, dirty, promiscuous. But the real culprit was Ben. The realization of this simple truth made her feel better. And Pamela did something she'd never thought she'd do before she hugged Emma tightly. Thank you, she said to her sister. It was the first time she'd ever felt warm feelings for an unloved relative. She was so smart, Emma, and sensitive. Are we going to tell our parents? Emma asked. No, not at all. Pamela objected. I want to forget the whole thing as soon as possible. You realize that even though it was his fault, it would still be a shame for me if people found out. Emma nodded understandingly. Of course, she knew what her sister was worried about. Reputation is a very fragile and important thing, especially if you live in a small town. Okay, let's just forget about it. Emma nodded. But forgetting it didn't work. 3 months later, Pamela was horrified to realize she was expecting a baby. It was October. Vacation was long over. Ben had left town even earlier. After he left, Pamela breathed a sigh of relief. Still, the proximity of this man was very tense, even though he tried to stay away from her. But Pamela remembered perfectly well how her pregnant mother had walked. And of course, in her 15 years, she knew the main signs. She had them all at once. Nausea, increased appetite, a tugging sensation in her abdomen, and most importantly, a delay. She hadn't noticed it at first. It had happened to her before. But soon it became impossible to ignore the troubling symptoms. She couldn't even tell Emma about it, but she couldn't hide the shame of it either. What to do? What to do? It's a disgrace. They'll start looking for the culprit. No one will believe that Ben is the baby's father. It's useless to even say anything. This man has an impeccable reputation. He's the standard bearer for the locals. And Ben's right. A lot of the girls in town have a crush on him, and they make up stories about him from time to time, that he gave them a special look, or a hug, or a kiss. Or maybe it's all stories. But nobody believes the girls. So they'll definitely look for the culprit. And they'll probably assign it to some boy who can't justify himself. Andrew, most likely. Andrew lives near Pamela. They're kind of friends. They cheat off each other's homework. The kid sometimes carries heavy buckets home for the girl. The kids even tease them about being bride and groom over the summer. Andrew's the one who's going to get suspicious. Poor fellow, he'll have a hard time, all because of her. The mother will weep and quietly hate the daughter who brought such shame on the family. The father will probably even benefit, won't he? I don't think so. He is holding on, sometimes, and for smaller misdemeanors handed out to children slaps, and often recalled those times when young people birching, considering such methods undeservedly forgotten methods of education. Life became a nightmare. Pamela would become an outcast. Other girls will be forbidden by their families to even go near her. And the child, what will happen to him? The world will be hostile to him long before he's born. And then it'll get worse. Pamela can't handle it, definitely can't handle it. This life. What's it for? At night, when everyone was fast asleep, Pamela cried quietly into her pillow so as not to wake anyone. Surprisingly, the tears brought relief. Temporary, though. The girl desperately tried to find a way out to hide the pregnancy, and then quietly give birth somewhere and leave the baby in the forest. No, it's too complicated and scary. And could she leave a defenseless baby to die? It's not his fault. Try to terminate the pregnancy herself. It seemed like a lifesaver at first. Pamela carried heavy buckets and steamed for long periods in the bath she knew from her mother, who had been pregnant several times. When her daughter was already old enough, all of this was dangerous for women in childbirth. But her baby seemed to be strong. Nothing helped, the baby stayed inside. Moreover, it was actively growing, because Pamela already had a belly, still almost imperceptible, very neat. But that was just the beginning. Pamela was not herself. At school, did not listen to teachers, did not do her homework. The girl forgot about her dream of becoming a teacher. What kind of career plans can there be when there are such problems? And Pamela is not studying now. She will have a child in her arms. She would be a single mother in front of everyone. And so young. Emma tried to rouse her cousin. She thought she was worried about the story from the summer, but Emma had no idea it was more serious than that. And Pamela hadn't told her, but she couldn't say it out loud.
One night, lying in her narrow bunk, Pamela decided that it was all too hard for her, too unbearable, and she didn't want this life at all, because there would be nothing more good. Only tears of shame, sighs, poverty, general disapproval, reproaches, even beatings of parents. Is it worth clinging to such a life? And she suddenly thought of the Albany River, flowing at the foot of the hill on which the town settled.
It was on the bank of the river that the event that had divided her life into before and after had taken place. So it would end there, Pamela decided. She got out of bed, trying not to creak the springs, grabbed from the table the long silk ribbon that Emma used to weave into her thick braid in the mornings, and slipped out of the house in a light nightgown that reached almost to her ankles. It was already October, and her arms were immediately covered with goose flesh from the cold, but it would not be long before Pamela could feel nothing at all. She hurried toward the river, almost running, for she was afraid to change her mind. She stopped at the water's edge, She had to tie her hands with this ribbon, so that at the decisive moment she would not slacken and swim out. Pamela struggled, but managed to do it. Soon her hands were bound wrist to wrist. She could not swim out now. All that remained was to enter the river and take a few steps. The river was not wide, but it was deep enough. Children were not allowed here without their parents. A pale moon shone from the sky, about the same as then, a silent witness to Pamela's terrible secret. The girl stepped into the icy water. The river burned her feet with cold. But Pamela took another step, then another and another. And now the water was almost up to her chest. There was not much more to go. It was frightening to take those fateful steps. But Pamela had no way out. She realized it quite clearly. All she had to do was be brave enough to put all her problems behind her. I thought about that moment a lot afterward, Pamela said, resting her chin on her fist. Amanda stares at her with her eyes wide open. She realizes that the story ended well because Pamela is sitting across from her, but she still feels uneasy. I didn't see the way out then. The old woman shook her head. Indeed, she didn't. It wasn't as bad as I had pictured in my head. But I realized it much later. If it hadn't been for a happy accident, I wouldn't have realized it at all. When Pamela was up to her neck in the icy water, she heard a desperate cry from behind her. "Stop, don't." Then she heard a loud splash. Someone was rushing to her rescue. The girl froze. The situation seemed too unreal. Then she slowly turned around. It was Emma, wearing a nightgown as long as Pamela's but with her father's robe over it. Emma reached her sister in no time and dragged her toward the shore. Pamela resisted. Soon both girls were on the ground, drenched, freezing, shivering. "Get home." Stern Emma commanded. "You'll catch cold." Pamela nodded. Emma looked at her sister's bound wrists and sighed. Then she quickly untied the tape, took Pamela's hand, and the girls ran home. They quickly changed into dry clothes and dived into their beds, each in her own. But a moment later, Emma was under the covers with her sister. "I knew something was wrong with you a long time ago," she whispered. "I've been watching you. What are you up to? Why would you do something like that?" "You don't know anything," Pamela sighed. She was shivering, even though she was warm under the blanket. Perhaps it was fear that was beginning to realize what she had almost done. "So tell me," Emma demanded. "I won't tell anyone," Pamela said. Emma lay silent and obviously thinking about something. "You fool," she said at last. "Why didn't you consult me at once? Your problem is easily solved." And Emma told about a witch doctor from their native village, who had been curing women in their village and the surrounding villages of unwanted pregnancies all her life. And whoever went to her, even rumored to have come from the city. She helps young girls too. Emma continued to share information. She helps them for free, just because they have no other choice. And with the adults, Miss Hannah asks for money or groceries and she will help. Emma looked at her sister hopefully. Was there still more to come? Did Pamela really have a way out? "Of course she does," Emma said confidently. "Tomorrow, after school, I'll go to Miss Hannah's and make all the arrangements." And Emma was serious, reliable. She certainly didn't fail. The next day she had a plan ready. Emma had asked her parents to stay with her old friends in a neighboring town for the weekend and supposedly decided to spend time with her sister. In reality, the girls were going to stay at Ms. Hannah's cabin for 24 hours. The old woman was already waiting for the girls. She warned the sisters that it would take time for Pamela to recover from the procedure. That's why Emma had made up the story with her friends. Pamela was scared of a lot of things: pain, failure, exposure. And she was ashamed in front of this stranger, Ms. Hannah. Although Emma convinced her that she had seen all sorts of things in her life and treated everything with understanding. Even pities young girls in trouble. That's why she helps them for free. Ms. Hannah lived in a small house on the edge of town. A cozy, clean, bright house. Pamela even smiled when she saw it. She had imagined the witch's lair quite differently: dark rooms with old-fashioned windows, bundles of dried herbs hanging everywhere, a skinny black cat with evil eyes. There was a cat, but it was ginger, fat, fluffy, indifferent. Miss Hannah received the girls cordially, gave them tea, asked Pamela about her trouble. She told Pamela everything without a secret, because she knew that this old woman would understand her and would not condemn her. Ms. Hannah nodded silently. shook her head, and whispered something cursing to Ben under her breath. The procedure itself took place in a separate room. Pamela had to lie down on a special table, hard, long, cold. It was painful. Despite the fact that Miss Hannah had given the young patient some kind of potion beforehand, Pamela bravely endured. She tried not to show that she felt anything at all. But at one moment the pain became so unbearable that the girl lost consciousness, simply blacked out, fell into darkness. When she came to, she saw Miss Hannah and Emma leaning over her. She herself was already lying on the soft bed. Both had worried faces. "Well, thank goodness you're awake," Miss Hannah exhaled. "I thought it was over." "Is it over?" Pamela asked in a weak voice. She felt pain in every cell of her body, not as sharp as the pain on the table, but still. "Yes, it's all over, Ms. Hannah replied. "The baby was clingy. I could barely manage it. I've never seen such a stubborn one. He almost took you with him. But you're young and strong. You did it." Pamela was frightened. She was afraid Ms. Hannah would say it was all for nothing, that the pregnancy was still developing. "I don't know if you'll be able to be a mother now that you're older, Ms. Hannah said. "I don't think so. The procedure was too hard, not without consequences. It happens." Pamela breathed out a sigh of relief. What did it matter what happened years from now? The main thing was that everything was fine now. She could finish school and go to college. All roads were open to her again. Pamela then felt happy and free. Many years had passed. Pamela, as she dreamed, became a teacher of physics and math. She finished school in this city, studied at the institute. The girl tried not to remember what happened to her then. But the story, of course, left an imprint on Pamela's behavior. She became more experienced, wiser, more cautious, and no longer allowed dangerous situations in her life, avoided guys. Pamela did not trust men, and even planned to live her whole life alone and independent. Other girls aspired to marry, dreamed of family life. Pamela was quite satisfied with a bachelor existence. Love did not pass her by. It happened when Pamela worked at school. Once in the gym needed repair. A construction crew arrived. It was led by a tall, russet-haired, blue-eyed guy. When Pamela first saw Adam, her heart gave a sweet shiver. She had forbidden herself to feel anything at first, but it was beyond her strength. All the more so when Adam began to pay the pretty young teacher some attention. This time everything was different, beautiful, romantic, and sincere. Adam asked Pamela out on dates and always greeted her with a bouquet of beautiful flowers. They sat in cafes, went to the movies and theaters, just walked around the city, talked a lot, got to know each other closer and closer, and closer. And at one fine moment, Pamela realized that she couldn't live without Adam. Happiness. He felt the same way. The young people got married. Pamela moved into her husband's apartment, which he got from work. The couple were happy. They lived soul to soul, but they couldn't have a baby. And I wanted one so badly, Pamela sighed. Of course, I knew what was wrong. Hannah had warned me that there might be problems with children in the future. But at the time, having just gotten rid of the problem, it didn't bother me at all. A sad Pamela told her husband all about it. She didn't want there to be any secrets between them. Pamela was mentally prepared for Adam to leave her. Who would want someone like that? But he only hugged her tightly and told her it wasn't important. Adam took pity on me, Pamela continued. He, like Emma, blamed Ben for everything. So we'll have to live alone, without children. That's all right, that's what happens. And they lived, enjoying each other, traveling, working, meeting friends, visiting interesting places, reading, sharing impressions of what they had read, watching TV together, supported each other in everything. Adam and Pamela became the closest and dearest people. Wonderful, simply golden years, full of love, acceptance, and mutual understanding. For Pamela, they were a reward, payback for a cold and unhappy childhood. But time takes its toll. Pamela and Adam grew old. His heart problems have worsened since his retirement. And 2 years ago, Pamela was left alone. Adam had a heart attack right in front of his terrified wife. She took the loss hard and still hasn't fully recovered. It's only now that he's not around that I realize what loneliness is. Pamela shook her head. It's when there's no one to talk to, no one to care about. It's hard, Amanda nodded sympathetically. She temporarily forgot about her own problem. What kind of problem is it anyway? I'll tell my parents, they'll be grumpy, but they'll figure something out. There will be a way out. This is not the old days, when the family of a girl who got into such a situation lay indelible shame. The XXI century is here, and this does not happen. Although, of course, it will not be easy. The apartment is small, and there's a new baby. Do you know what I was thinking? Pamela suddenly smiled. What if you came to my place and rented a room from me? Not for money, but for domestic help. I'm old, weak. Sometimes it's hard even to go to the store, and here I have a living soul near me. I don't know, Amanda laughed, realizing at once that it was an ideal option. But it's not profitable for you. The room could be rented out for a lot of money. I don't have that kind of money, and all you're offering to do is help you with the household chores. It's an unequal exchange. Take it. Pamela smiled warmly. And you feel good, and I'm not so lonely. And when the baby is born, I'll help you with the baby. I'd love to. I've never had children of my own. So I just love babies, Pamela continued. How many relatives have you swaddled? It's exhausting. And you're going to need some help, too. Amanda still couldn't believe her good fortune. It was the perfect solution to the problem. A real solution. The old woman is really lonely, and Amanda needs support and participation. They would save each other. Thank you. Tears came to her eyes. The future is finally becoming clearer. Bright rainbow colors. And faith. For the first time, I felt the joy of being a mom soon. I now have a plan, I have support, which means everything will be okay.
Alice woke up slowly. What's going on? Her mind raced. There was something hard against her back, and panic immediately made her heart race. Maybe this is still a dream, Alice thought, trying to remember what had happened before she came to her senses. And the new girl seemed to have woken up. Came the gruff voice of a woman in the distance. And you say dead? No. It's just a dream, Alice reassured herself. Just a nightmare that's about to dissipate, but the smells, the sounds that entered her nostrils and ears were too real for a nightmare. And I wonder where she was brought to us from. Came the voice again. Did a cutie like that manage to finish someone off? The voices were rough and unpleasant. Alice struggled to open her eyes and realized she was in a dingy cell. Not at a resort, said a woman, sitting not far from Alice. Several gray-clad prisoners were sitting next to her, and the stare seemed no good. Alice felt fear engulf her entire being. She desperately didn't understand how she had ended up in this casemate. What are you looking at? One of the sitters threw angrily. Alice immediately jumped up, huddled in a corner, and tucked her legs under her. Her heart was racing, her eyes filled with terror. The people in the cell were clearly repeat offenders, with the marks of a hard life on their faces, and the fingers of their hands were littered with various tattoos. Oh, she's going to faint from fear again, one of the sitters grinned. I'm Barbara, muttered the recidivist sitting closest to Alice the Watcher. What's your name? Still dazed, Alice couldn't understand what was happening. Just yesterday she had been in the arms of her husband Daniel on one of Sunny Beach's beaches. Memories came to her like a flashed frame from a movie. Do you remember when we first met? Daniel asked then, smiling. Well, how could anyone forget that? You took me away from my own birthday party and drove me around town all night until it was time to meet the sunrise. Alice smiled. Their whole relationship had been just magical, unbelievable, like an adventure. But now the fairy tale had turned into a nightmare. Alice dreaded every minute spent in that gloomy cell. She was uncomfortable. She couldn't understand how she'd even ended up in this situation in the first place. Did you swallow your tongue? Barbara muttered angrily. The woman got up from her bunk, walked over to Alice, and leaned over her threateningly. Talk about sewing someone up, Barbara hissed. Maybe you're too cool to talk to us. And my dear must have just forgotten her tongue on the outside, exclaimed the other. The unpleasant laughter and derogatory remarks of the cellmates made Alice feel even more afraid and helpless. She could feel the despair coursing through her soul. There were tears in her eyes, but she tried to hold them back, afraid to show her weakness. So what did you get raked up for? Barbara muttered. "Tell me before you're driven under the bunkhouse." "I'm sorry," Alice mumbled, then still tried to explain. "I don't understand." "Maybe you drank too much champagne at your fancy party," one of Barbara's companions hissed angrily. She stood up, picked up a mug from the table, and splashed Alice in the face with cold water. Alice shuddered, feeling the moisture spreading through her clothes. "For what? What have I done?" The desperation in her voice was growing with each passing second. Finally, Alice couldn't take it anymore and jumped up from her seat straight to the door. Beginning to pound on the steel-battered barrier, she screamed. "Somebody open up!" Alice pounded her fists on the cold surface. Suddenly, the small window in the center opened again, and the sleepy face of a guard appeared in the opening. "What do you want?" Scared, he asked gruffly. "Call the supervisor. I need to talk to him. There's some kind of mistake." "I'm not supposed to be here," Alice yelled. "Girl, you're in the wrong place to ask to see someone. Wait until morning. Maybe you'll get an explanation," then the guard tossed indifferently. "Please, this is important. I need to get to the bottom of this situation. Call the supervisor. Please," Alice continued to plead with hope in her voice. The man only shook his head, maintaining a look of indifference on his face. "No one's going to make a request in the middle of the night for someone like you," the policeman muttered. "Frankly, if I were you, I wouldn't count on any response during the day either." Alice took a step back, clasping her hands to her chest. Feeling helpless inside, she was forced to accept the rejection. The metal flap slammed shut. The lock clinked. Sitting back in her seat, Alice felt the icy claws of fear clutching her heart. At no time in her life had she ever felt as insignificant as she did now. Alice tried to calm herself, but the fear and bewilderment would not leave her. She did not know how she had ended up in prison. Alice felt completely disconnected from reality. Barbara, who had taunted her earlier, came over and asked, "Are you really that stupid, or are you just pretending to be?" "No, I don't remember anything. I don't even know what date today is," Alice replied with despair in her voice. "July 18th, Barbara said with bewilderment. Alice felt a pang in her chest. It had been almost 2 days since she'd been in this nightmarish reality, and that knowledge only added to her sense of despair. "Who are you anyway?" Softening her voice, Barbara inquired. "It seems like just yesterday I married Daniel. We had a wedding on the beach. It was so beautiful, and today I wake up in this prison," Alice began to say. "Is that all you have to say?" Barbara raised an eyebrow skeptically. "My dad died recently, and he left me a pretty good inheritance. But that doesn't explain anything. I've been happy. We were doing well in my marriage to Daniel." Alice shook her head. Memories of her father made her soul feel sad. "I guess they said you killed someone," Barbara replied in a lowered voice. "What kind of nonsense is that?" "Who could I have killed?" Alice sighed sorrowfully. She felt an inner shock and panic. This realization terrified her, and she still couldn't believe the reality of what was happening. It didn't take long for morning to come. The scowling guard opened his window again, found Alice's gaze, and beckoned her over. "You're being summoned," he muttered when he saw the girl come to the door. "Warden?" Alice asked hopefully. She interjected. Face the wall. The guard swung the door open, pushed her against the nearest wall, turned her around, and clasped her hands painfully. "Let go!" Alice exclaimed with desperation in her voice. She felt the cold bracelets click on her wrist. The guard roughly took her under the elbow and pushed her out into the hallway. "Good morning, sweetheart." A man in an investigator's uniform smiled unpleasantly. "My name is John, the first investigating your case, but I wouldn't say I'm glad to meet you," Alice snorted. Her handcuffs were never removed, and Alice was forced to sit on the very edge of the uncomfortable chair. "Well, I'm sure you'll get used to our conditions," John smiled unpleasantly again. "Although perhaps you're ready to confess to your stepfather's death now." After all, you were the one who killed him. What stepfather? My father died recently. Who do you think I am? Alice exclaimed in bewilderment. Well, honey, you don't have to pretend like you don't know. Your fingerprints are at the crime scene, and your DNA evidence confirms your involvement. John tossed some opinion sheets onto the table, pointing to them with his hand in an inviting gesture. Alice rounded her eyes in horror. Her heart was ready to jump out of her chest. What fingerprints? What does DNA have to do with it? A panicked thought battered at the back of her mind. That's impossible. I didn't kill anyone. I don't even know what crime we're talking about, Alice whispered. Of course you do, of course you do. We've got a whole lot of innocent people here, John nodded. What's this then? The investigator dug through the folder again, then showed Alice the crime scene photos. Some man was lying face down, with blood all around him and shrapnel lying on the floor near his body. What does this man have to do with this? Alice asked in a trembling voice. She could feel the ground slipping from under her feet, and the worry was weighing so heavily on her soul that it was about to tear her apart. That's your business, John marveled. I might as well be. But here the neighbors have absolutely pinpointed the culprit, and even made a sketch. The investigator pointed with his hand to a booth hanging to Alice's right. She turned and stared at her own image. The girl in the sketch looked exactly like her, except the first and last name were different. This is some kind of forgery. It can't be me. Alice felt everything inside her turn over with horror. This sketch was proof that she had something to do with the mysterious crime. Sweetheart, we found you on the seashore. You were lying there unconscious and had no identification on you. Your sketch matched the description given by the witnesses. Therefore, you are now a murder suspect, John said, savoring every word. So that's not my last name. I'm a completely different person. Go to my husband. He will tell you. Alice cried out in despair. We haven't seen any husband yet, he muttered doubtfully. We have, however, discovered a man's belongings on the shore. I suppose your spouse, if there was one, is in distress, either drowned himself or another victim of your criminal tendencies. Alice felt her whole body go numb. She couldn't believe Daniel could have gotten into danger. Ask someone else. My co-workers at work, relatives. But someone has to tell you what my real name is, and you'll even give those people's contacts yourself, she said. John raised an eyebrow skeptically. Yes, now. Alice, finding herself in a serious situation, began to frantically search her memory, trying to recall anyone who could confirm her identity and dispel any doubts that she was innocent. John watched her the whole time, enjoying the desperation of the suspect, but after a couple minutes he was clearly bored with the spectacle. Remember? The investigator inquired in a jumped-up tone. Just a minute. You don't have a minute, John bellowed. He leaned across the table, grabbed Alice by the hair and yanked hard, making her head whip from side to side. Quickly sign the confession. Get to the bunkhouse. I'm not going to be dealing with crap all day. Tears spurted from Alice's eyes. She cried out painfully, feeling the pain pierce her head and travel down her spine. The investigator continued to yell something and threaten, but now his voice sounded as if from far away. Helen, my subordinate at my father's firm, Alice said through sobs. What? John interjected angrily. Helen Savage. She'll confirm that she knows me. The phone or something, not understanding, John interjected. Phone dictate. Stupid. The investigator let go of his hair. Alice sobbed a couple more times, then began confusedly dictating the right numbers. I'll call her. But if this is some kind of joke, you're going to be very sorry, John muttered angrily. Alice stared at the floor in pain and fear. The mind abstracted, preferring to ignore reality. Her gaze froze. After all, she wasn't capable of experiencing so much stress in such a short time, was she? Understand? No, John bellowed, giving Alice a whipping slap. "Got it," Alice barely audibly whispered, feeling the blood begin to ooze from her busted lip. Several hours passed, which she spent like this in the investigator's office. "Excuse me, Mr. Investigator. There's someone here to see you," came the voice of a guard from behind the door. "What's going on here?" the blonde shouted indignantly, throwing a lightning-fast glare in the investigator's direction as she barely crossed the threshold of his office. "Ah, a friend of the suspect." I guess John shook his head indifferently. "Yes, I've known Alice for a long time, and I have every confidence in her innocence. She is the daughter of my boss. And at the time this crime is alleged to have been committed, she was in a completely different location. We have witnesses, documents to prove her alibi," Helen spoke coldly. "And we have proof," John parried stiffly. "This is some kind of setup. Alice is innocent of anything, and no amount of fingerprints will help you wrangle 50 people who saw her in person at the negotiations on the day of the alleged murder." Alice listened to Helen and John's conversation with mixed feelings of anxiety and hope. At first, she had felt horror and anxiety as she listened to the investigator insist on her guilt and present the evidence. But with Helen's arrival and her confident words of innocence, hope rang within. "I'm asking you to leave Alice alone," Helen said peremptorily. "Otherwise, we'll have to get the press involved." "No press," John retorted sourly. It seemed he had to admit that they simply didn't have enough grounds to accuse Alice. "I'm sorry, I think there's been a mix-up," John said reluctantly. Turning to Alice, "You may not be the only child in your family. There is a possibility that you had a twin sister." "What twins?" Alice interjected bitterly. "But if you have any other ways to explain the devilishness going on in this case, I'm listening," the man muttered unhappily. A storm of feelings erupted inside Alice. She couldn't understand what this was about or why there was suddenly information about twins. She felt her life falling apart and the footing going out from under her feet. Mixed feelings, confusion, bewilderment, fear overwhelmed her. She realized that she needed to solve this puzzle to understand what was even going on in her life. Helen insisted that Alice be released immediately. "Helen, do you know what happened to Daniel?" Alice asked first thing. "No one has seen him for the last few days," the assistant shrugged. "Everyone thought you were on vacation after the wedding." The car began to pull away from the gloomy building, and anxiety grew more and more pronounced in Alice's heart. "Are you sure you can manage?" Helen asked doubtfully, looking at her superior. "Yes. Don't worry," Alice dismissed absent-mindedly. All her thoughts were now focused on the search. She ran into the house, literally flew up the second floor to her in her husband's bedroom, and embraced the sight, but there was only emptiness. "Where could you have disappeared to?" Alice muttered fearfully, looking through Daniel's things. Dialing a familiar number with trembling fingers, she put the phone to her ear, listening to the dial tone with bated breath. Come on," she whispered. It was all to no avail. The phone was silent, as was the empty bedroom, which was unable to clear up the monstrous situation one bit. Alice remembered again how they had planned to spend a romantic vacation on the beach. "Trust me, it's going to be awesome," Daniel said with a smile, showing her pictures of golden sand and azure sea. "We'll be all alone there," Alice said hesitantly, as if sensing trouble. "Well, that's just the opposite of great. Just imagine you, me, the sea, and no one else around. Isn't it a fairy tale?" A fairy tale. And if Alice had known how this ill-fated trip would turn out, she would never have agreed to this godforsaken place. "Hello, Bill, this is Daniel's wife. Hi, do you have any idea where Daniel might be right now?" she said, dialing the number of a fellow spouse they had met at the wedding. "Hi, I thought he was on a wedding trip with you," Bill replied doubtfully. "And we just missed each other." "Sorry to bother you," Alice said. "Is something wrong? Do you need help?" Bill muttered worriedly. "No, sorry, bye." Alice hung up the phone. Her inner feelings were at breaking point. Just out of desperation, Alice opened the message list on her phone, her eyes stumbling upon a text message from the DHS informing her that a major storm was coming. A chilling realization ran through her body. The words that had come almost a week ago never left her. A violent storm. The danger the meteorologists had warned of. Right, how could I have forgotten about the storm? They'd had to postpone the trip. But Daniel had insisted that no forecast of bad weather could interfere with their love. Okay, I hope you're right, Alice said. Romance and carelessness mixed with champagne that day, and she did nothing to stop her husband. How could I forget that the meteorologists were predicting a major storm that day? We couldn't only give warning. It was our mistake, but reflection and self-deprecation brought no comfort. It was my fault. I should have convinced Daniel not to go ashore, and I remained silent. And now he's probably drowned because of me. Alice's voice trembled with guilt and hopelessness. She tried to hold back the tears, but still they rolled down her cheeks, leaving hot paths behind them. Her breath caught at the thought that she would never see Daniel again, that he might have died because of her own carelessness. Daniel. I'm sorry. Alice closed her eyes, trying to dull the pain, but she could feel the guilt pressing on her shoulders like a heavy weight that she must now carry alone. Alice grieved for a few days, but then determination and the desire to find out the truth took over. I can't sit here in despair any longer, Alice exclaimed, feeling the walls of the empty bedroom literally suffocating her. Daniel deserves for the truth to come out. I have to find out what happened that day. That being said, it was done. She began contacting people who could help her in this endeavor. One of them was Victor Palick, her late father's former partner. Alice, I understand you. Losing loved ones is very painful, he said with compassion. I've known you since you were in diapers, and I'm always ready to help. I have an acquaintance named Andrew. I think he can help with this case. He'd want to work for me, Alice said doubtfully. You see, he's got an expensive operation coming up that he doesn't have enough money for. If you're willing to pay well, the guy will get you the very devil out of the ground. Trust me, he's the best detective I know. Yeah, I'm willing. It's a small price to pay for the truth. Alice shook her head. That's good. She clasped her hands to her chest. Feeling mixed emotions inside, Alice was willing to go to any lengths to find answers, even if it did require her to spend an unexpected amount of money. She met Andrew at a small cafe in the center of town. Alice gave him all the information she had on Daniel, directing him to search for him. But she decided to start on the other side, to find traces of her doppelganger. It remained to discuss a plan of action, which they did at a neat coffee shop table. I understand the mission. We'll try to find Daniel, or at least find out what happened to him. But what do you need this doppelganger for? Andrew asked, perplexed. The investigator just decided to write off an unsolved case on you, so he made up a fairy tale. Is it worth your time? I think if I find it might shed some light on the whole story. Maybe she knows something or has something to do with what happened. We need to find out why I was mistaken for her, and how it's simultaneously connected to Daniel's disappearance, Alice reasoned. Yeah, maybe there's no doppelganger at all. What makes you think that's true? Andrew said. It's just, it's like a gut feeling that there's a string to pull, and it all happened in the same period of time. Alice's eyes read determination to find out everything, and either find Daniel or mourn his ashes. Andrew nodded, realizing that was the logical course of action. Okay, let's start by looking for traces of your doppelganger. Perhaps her friends, co-workers, or even family can help. I'll work on that for now, while you continue your own search. And if you find anything, let me know. I think we can solve this mystery together. There's no need to despair before the time. Thank you, Alice whispered softly. Andrew's reassurance gave her strength, helped her shake off her troubles. Alice arrived in the quiet suburban neighborhood where her copy was said to be living with her stepfather. "What a shithole," Alice muttered, deciding not to waste any time. She headed straight for the house, feeling a mixed sense of anxiety and determination. Finally, gone somewhere, the wretch. "Left me and the kids and went away. And you didn't even tell us when you'd be back," the burly aunt blurted out as she stepped out into the stairwell. "I'm sorry, you have me confused." "I'm not who you thought I was," Alice said doubtfully. "Shameless. Forgetting about your brood and driving off somewhere. So irresponsible," echoed the gaunt man. Alice tried to explain to them that they were wrong. It seemed the neighbors had mistaken her for a double. "Wait a minute, I'm not Anna. You've got me confused." "What are you talking about?" wailed the little man. "Wait," yanked him back doubtfully by his aunt. "There's something wrong. She's kind of frumpy, not at all like our catty." "Exactly. And her features are softer and her eyes look different," the man muttered, immediately replacing anger with curiosity. "My name is Greg, and this is my wife Irene. Excuse me, but who is Katie and where is she now?" Alice interjected. "And she went away a long time ago. Left us with the kids. Didn't say when she'd be back. And didn't tell me anything at all," Greg grumbled resentfully. "Yeah, you two seem to be a lot alike, like sisters. Katie lived here with her mom until she died. Her stepfather drank and abused her from childhood," Irene said in a lowered voice. "And then he was found dead with a knife in his back. They suspect Katie killed him and ran away. I warned him not to torture a girl so much." Alice listened to the neighbors, feeling mixed emotions. She realized that she had a very mysterious story to tell, and she wanted to know more. The tale shocked her. "It's unbelievable. I couldn't even imagine that I could have a sister. So where is she now?" In a trembling voice, Alice asked again. "Oh, we don't know," Irene shrugged. "She was missing when the incident happened. The kids, 3 of them you can imagine, were put in an orphanage." Looking at her neighbor, Alice felt the bitter pain and simultaneous joy of knowing she might have a family, new relatives. "Wow," Alice thought to herself. She sat in the car, staring at the orphanage where she was headed to see her nephews. The phone rang and she saw that it was Andrew, detective, who was helping her with the investigation. "Hey, what's up?" she said tiredly. "I found some interesting information. It turns out that shortly before he was lost at sea, Daniel took out life insurance on his life for a substantial sum. The beneficiary of the insurance is listed as an unknown girl." Alice shuddered and pressed the phone harder against her ear. Her heart began to beat faster. "How's that? Tell me more about it." "I'm going to check for additional details, but it seems Daniel was able to insure his life for some ulterior purpose. It's kind of weird. I think we should find out who the girl is and why Daniel left her," the insurance Andrew said. Shock rippled through Alice's body. She was slowly realizing that her husband, her beloved and closest person, might have married her for some obscure purpose, only to die afterwards and leave the money to some unknown person. The thought seemed both absurd and eerie at the same time. "I can't believe it. It's horrible. What kind of person would do such a thing? And who is she, this girl? We must certainly find out. Of course, I won't give up the search. Let's see this investigation through to the end." Andrew's voice began to get lost in the storm of emotions that such strange news left behind. "Okay, sorry, I've got a case. I need to finish it. Need any help?" "I'm out of town. I think I can handle it. I'll be in touch if you need anything," Alice said. Andrew dropped the call. There was a short beep on the speaker. Alice entered the orphanage. 3 little kids of about 5 years old, playing in the hallway and unaware that their Aunt Alice had come to meet them, caught her eye. My heart sank. There was too much character in their faces, and they were similar to each other, giving away their origins. "Hello, who are you here to see?" the woman asked, smiling at Alice. You know, I have a strange request, Alice mumbled. At that moment, her heart beat harder. Alice wanted to make sure that she was really related to these children. Could you give me samples for DNA testing on these kids over here, Alice said, pointing to her nephews. I don't know what you mean, the woman frowned. I recently found out that I might be related to them, and I'd like to run a test. If it turns out to be correct, I can take the children, can't I? Alice could feel the excitement twisting everything inside. When she had come to the clinic to have the DNA test done to confirm her parentage, the doctor had immediately warned her that she would have to wait. And how could it even come to this? Alice muttered, rubbing her palms together nervously. She waited for the results of the tests with hope and fear, which was already habitually present in her life, only changing its appearance from time to time. Finally, the result was ready. Well, here are your tests, the lab technician said, holding out an envelope. The result is positive. Congratulations, or is it sympathy? I don't know what your reason for doing this test was. Listening to his words, Alice shook with excitement. She slowly opened the form and carefully read the small lines. Soon she was back in the orphanage director's office, holding the papers with the results. Her heart was beating harder than ever. Hello, Alice Wright. What a familiar face you have. What can I do for you? The principal asked. Yes, that's right. I came back with the results of the DNA test. The children that were given to you a while ago are my nephews. The test confirmed the parentage, replied Alice. The principal was stunned by the news, but then his face suddenly lit up with memories, as if he finally realized why she seemed familiar. You know, I have a great memory for alumni, the principal said cryptically, but age, I repent. It's only just now dawned on me. Why? It seems as if I've seen you before, Alice marveled. Really, yes, I remember that girl and their mother, and you when you were barely older than your nephews. You were sisters, and then you were separated as infants. But not me. I was working as a caretaker at the time, and had no influence on anything. Once again, Alice felt her heart clench at the truth that had been revealed. Just like that, a phrase dropped so easily it completely shattered the life she was used to. Yeah, it's weird. I was sure that I was my parents' own daughter, and now I realized that I always felt something was wrong. Tears came to her eyes. Trying to save face, Alice furtively wiped them from the corners of her eyes, but the gesture didn't escape the principal's notice. This is a difficult moment, but it's also a chance to be reunited with your family. I hope you can help them once things are settled, he said. Alice felt joy, but also fear and uncertainty about the future. But she knew she now had a purpose to be who she really was and to take care of her real family. After a very long time, Alice returned to the principal's office once again. His name was Christopher Valentine, and this time they had time to get to know each other properly. It wasn't easy. I spent a week trying to get all the right papers together, going through a lot of restrictions and red tape. But when I saw their smiles, when they saw me for the first time, all the difficulties turned out to be for naught, Alice said softly. Christopher Valentine looked at the newfound guardian of 3 little ones with a smile and nodded at her. You know, no hardship can compare to the joy you have brought to these children and their smiles, a reward for your selfless care. Alice smiled and sighed. Thank you, Christopher Valentine. I must do everything in my power to provide them with a better future. The joy of motherhood, unavailable to Alice before, colored her life with pleasant colors. However, the shadow of the unknown still lay over the story of Daniel and missing Katie. Alice met Andrew at the cafe to discuss the results of his investigations. Well, did you find anything new? Alice asked. Barely had he crossed the threshold of the coffee shop. Yes. Alice, I found the name of the girl who was supposed to be paid the insurance money on Daniel's policy. Her name is Lucy Crawford, Andrew replied. Alice paled slightly when she heard the name. She had heard it before, hadn't she? Lucy Crawford. Turns out Lucy worked as a secretary in the department of your company that Daniel headed. It turns out my little investigation uncovered a little more curious details. What curious details? Alice asked. Andrew's words left Alice perplexed and alarmed. Why would the secretary receive an insurance payout after his death? Why not me or his relatives, she thought. I think a little. Alice, you're not a stupid woman. Andrew shook his head. Of course, we don't know all the details, but from all appearances, there was an affair between her and Daniel. That relationship could have gone very far and apparently led to something bad. Alice froze, trying not to breathe. It seemed that one careless movement and she would crumble. The secretary's affair with her husband, the insurance policy, all pointed to the fact that she might have been involved in his death. Maybe she's the killer? Alice's mind flashed. She leaned back in her chair. A heavy feeling of disappointment and loss came over her. Alice picked up her briefcase, looked up, and headed in the direction of human resources. She hoped to find out how to contact Lucy Crawford so she could locate her and get to the bottom of this situation. Hello, I'm looking for information on an employee of Lucy's. I need to get in touch with her, Alice said. When the human resources manager came out to her, she looked at Alice with surprise and then smiled. Lucy Crawford. You mean the former employee? I mean, she quit just a day ago, decided to move to another company. It didn't even do her 2 weeks. I don't know who her patron is, the manager replied. Alice was shocked. Why did she quit? Where does she work now? That's the thing. Moved to our competitors after leaving her application just a day ago. Said they offered her more favorable terms, but it's strange that she left so suddenly. Alice realized that her target had slipped away at the last moment. She needed to find Lucy and find out the truth, but that was proving more difficult than she had expected. Andrew didn't call until a few days later, when Alice was finally desperate to find anything. Alice, I've managed to track Lucy down, and I have good news, Andrew announced from the doorstep. Months of investigation and constant communication had melted the ice between them. Now they were a little closer than just colleagues. Andrew even caught himself thinking that Alice sympathized with him as a woman, but he wasn't in a hurry to give in to his feelings. What is it? Tell me already, Alice said impatiently. It turns out that Daniel is alive. Andrew immediately stunned her, and he was closer than you think. Not far away at all, in a cabin in the woods, almost near the edge of your town. Alice felt a whole wave of feelings. When Andrew had informed her that Daniel was hiding near their house, at first it had been surprise. How was that even possible? Then relief at the thought that her husband was still alive. However, that was quickly replaced by other dark emotions. I didn't want to bother you right away. That's why I called the police to begin with, Andrew continued cautiously. What, they detained him? Why did you decide that without me? I just did my job, Andrew shrugged. I didn't piss you off for helping me find the truth, not to put my husband behind bars. That's what interrogations are for, among other things, to find the truth. I'm sorry, Alice, but Daniel confessed to everything. Andrew shook his head regretfully. To everything he said. Told me that his intentions were unfair to you. He knew the code to your safe and was going to rob the house, just waiting for the right time. Ah, I can't believe it. He was willing to do that in his own house. As Alice realized the news about Daniel, her soul filled with a mixture of grief, disappointment, and a sense of betrayal that expressed itself in tears on her cheeks. Yes, that's exactly right. But thanks to the quick work of the police officers, we were able to thwart his plans. He repented and signed a clean confession. Andrew tried to support his friend. Yeah, it's hard to digest, Alice muttered, looking down at the floor. We've been through so much already. Now this. But I guess the important thing is that he's alive and will be punished for his actions. Yeah, it's not your fault he turned out to be a criminal. A fake death for insurance for a mistress. A robbery. He didn't deserve all that. But at least Daniel can't do any more harm. That must be hard. But you have to remember, you have those who are there to support you at any time. Thank you, Andrew. You've done so much, Alice whispered, shaking her head. Always happy to help. You're a strong woman. You're sure to get through this. Tears rolled down her cheeks, leaving salty trails. After Daniel's capture, the days stretched on. Andrew had offered to arrange a date with her ex-husband, but Alice had refused, not wanting to see the unhappy traitor. Now she wanted to concentrate on getting on with her life and regaining some semblance of footing. One day, Alice decided to call the office to see if everything was all right. Helen, as usual, answered her call in a businesslike manner, but the conversation suddenly descended into strange happenings. "Alice, how are you?" "We've been worried about you," Helen said. "Thank you. Yes, more or less. But we need to move on somehow. I understand we haven't worried you, but do you know about Lucy yet?" "What happened to her?" Alice was wary. An ominous foreboding settled in her soul. "Turns out she just betrayed Daniel, and it looks like she started gathering some dirt on her new bosses," Helen said. "They fired her, set up an internal investigation, and then concluded that she was involved in insurance fraud. So Lucy ended up in jail too, just like your ex-spouse. It's kind of a nightmare. All the seemingly familiar people have turned out to be crooks. I feel like my life has changed irrevocably." Alice realized that she needed to move on despite all the obstacles, but she was too overwhelmed by everything that had happened. In a big, cozy house surrounded by greenery and flowers, she took care of her family, setting up house for the children, building place and play and learn. These boys were like her own children to her now. She did her best to make their lives happy and carefree. The little ones, barely learning to talk, were full of energy and questions. Alice taught them by playing interesting educational games and helped them explore the world around them. In the evenings, they gathered together in the living room. Alice read stories before bedtime. After a while, Alice and Andrew stayed in a small room after the operation. There was silence, and both realized that they now had a chance to talk alone. "Thank you, Alice, for finding the strength to talk me into this examination. I didn't think I'd ever walk normally." "You're a brave man," Andrew said. "You've overcome so much in life." "I was sure you could do it," Alice replied. "But I have to say, I couldn't have done it without your support. You've always been there for me. And I'm very grateful for that," Andrew smiled softly. "Friends are supposed to help each other through the hardest moments," Alice smiled back timidly. "I want you to know how grateful I am to you. I mean, you literally changed my life," Andrew said. "And you changed mine too," Alice replied. Their eyes met, and in that moment, words became superfluous. Smiles of happiness and gratitude played on their faces. They knew they now had their whole lives to share together. The hospital room was filled with soft light streaming in through the half-closed curtains. Andrew lay on the bunk while Alice sat next to him, holding his hand in hers. It was at that moment that they realized something had changed between them. "Alice, I feel like I've gotten to know you better than I ever have. You're so caring, so kind," Andrew said. "It's been mutual. You were the only one who stayed by my side when things were hard for me," Alice replied. Their hands began to squeeze each other tighter. "Andrew, the moment our eyes meet, I realize that I feel something more than friendship for you. I like you," Alice whispered, desperately embarrassed. Her heart pounded in her chest, making her whole body tremble with excitement and fear. She had decided to take this step, no matter what, because she wanted to be honest with herself and with the man she could love. "Me too, Alice, I can't imagine my life without you. You fill my heart with warmth and happiness," Andrew replied. They drew closer to each other and their lips joined in a tender kiss that was full of feeling and promise. Their love, which had arisen at the most inopportune moment, turned out to be real and strong, ready to cope with any difficulty. Katie's babies had long since grown accustomed to Alice's home and were an endless source of joy and laughter for their new caring mom. She hired a nanny for them, who took care of the children in her absence. But as it happens, even the most caring nanny didn't always have time for everything, especially considering the 3 active toddlers. Recently, the children started talking about something strange. They claimed to have seen their mom when no one was home. This woman was sad, but always read them stories, talked, and comforted them. They said that Katie would come to them in their room. "That sounds kind of weird. I think you should seek medical help, consult some doctor, although it could just be a childish fantasy. But yes, Andrew, you're right. We can't let this go unchecked. These are my children, and I don't want them to be threatened by anything," Alice said. At first, she thought it was just a fantasy, but as time went on, she began to notice strange things. Food was disappearing from the refrigerator. Things were moving around, and she felt like someone was watching her. This caused her anxiety and even some fear. Andrew moved into Alice's house, and together they decided to start solving the mysterious incidents that were happening to the children. They set up cameras in the house, hoping to record anything that might explain the children's strange stories. Andrew went on duty. He stayed up nights studying the camera footage and waiting for any unusual events to occur. But the long nights passed without any sign of any obvious manifestations of mysticism. He began to think more and more often that the children were badly mistaken, and perhaps this was just a figment of their imagination. A few days later, when everyone had decided that the children had simply made up the story and the night watch had been lifted, the little ones again said that Mommy was coming. This conversation caused Alice and Andrew to turn on the video cameras again, and their attention was drawn to the screen. "Do you see this? She comes at night to see the kids. It's really catty," my sister Alice exhaled excitedly. "I wonder what made her come back after all these months. I don't know, maybe she sensed the boys were in danger, or maybe she needs to pass something on. Let's find a way to contact her. Figure it out." But she comes on her own. Just waiting for another visit is enough, Andrew shrugged. "Yeah, we can't miss the chance to find out the truth. Why she's back and where she's been disappearing to in the first place," Alice agreed. And then one night they finally had their luck. Katie sneaked back into the house, thinking everyone was asleep. But Andrew and Alice were ready, meeting her right in the hallway. "Katie, hello there. We need some answers. Why are you coming back like a thief now?" Alice asked. "Yeah, I come to see them, to be closer to them." "But I didn't hurt anyone," replied the guest fearfully. "We've seen the camera footage, and we know you come when everyone is already asleep. Why all the secrecy?" Andrew frowned. "Please understand me. I don't want to hurt anyone. I just want to be around the kids," replied Katie. "Then why did you disappear? We all thought you were in trouble or dead." "What happened?" Alice asked, softening her voice a little. "A man owed a lot of money," began Katie explaining. "And when he realized he didn't have it, he decided to bail me out, said he didn't need me anymore. But I guess they weren't happy with that exchange," Andrew said. No, Katie shook her head sadly. "They killed him, and then they came after me as a witness." A confused but determined Alice walked over to her sister, who was shuffling nervously from foot to foot at the door. "Katie, I'm sorry you've been through all this. We can help you, but you need to cooperate with us. Turn yourself in to the police. Running away is not the answer. Let's talk about how we can do this so you can be exonerated." "You don't understand. I didn't kill my stepfather. It was his drinking buddies. They were behind the horror," Katie said with tears in her eyes. "I believe you. We'll get a good lawyer." "Yes, Katie, I know a good one. He's a real professional. He'll work on your case and prove that you're innocent. All we need is your consent to find out," Andrew said confidently. "Do you think it'll work?" Katie asked hopefully. "Absolutely," Alice nodded. "We won't leave you in the lurch. We're family." Katie, still covered in tears, hesitated at first, but then she took a deep breath and nodded firmly. "I don't want to run and hide anymore," she said. The police and Andrew breathed a sigh of relief, realizing that they were on the right track. Alice put her arms around her sister and stroked her back, comforting her. "It's the right thing to do. Katie will be by your side every step of the way." While Katie provided information to the lawyer, Andrew, like a true detective, continued his investigation. He checked all available evidence, conducted interviews, and soon conclusive evidence was found that Katie was innocent. Alice and Andrew supported her. They came to see her when she was in custody, discussed plans with her lawyer, and were always there to support her morally. Every look, every gesture said that they believed in her innocence, and finally the big day arrived. In court, all the evidence prepared by Andrew was presented, and after much debate, the court announced the verdict. "Katie, you are acquitted. Your innocence has been recognized by the court. You are hereby acquitted of all charges." Alice, Andrew, and Katie hugged each other joyfully. Tears of happiness came from all three of them, and it united them even more. Sitting in her cozy home, Alice decided to share some important news with her lover. Her heart was full of joy. She believed that Andrew would share her happiness, although she was a little apprehensive. Andrew, I'm pregnant, Alice breathed out and stood waiting. Alice, I love you very much, Andrew replied. They embraced, knowing that their future would be filled with joy and happiness. I'm sorry to interrupt. Barbara suddenly interrupted their unity. Yes, is something wrong? Alice and Andrew were immediately alarmed. No, I mean with the children. Barbara lowered her gaze. What is it? Andrew intervened. Alice, I'm sorry for reacting so emotionally. When I saw that mark on Katie's arm, it just shocked me. What's wrong? Why are you so worried? I saw the birthmark today. And it's exactly like the one on my daughter that I gave birth to many years ago. Are you sure? Andrew questioned warily, shifting his gaze from his nanny to his lover. Yes, that's for sure. I gave birth to 2 twin girls many years ago. I've long despaired of meeting them, but now with this mole, I have my eye on Alice. Scotty. Alice felt her heart begin to beat more frequently. The conversation was too exciting not to affect her, but Alice was hardly prepared for the turmoil Valentina wanted to unleash on her. Sobbing but looking at the young people, she decided to share what had long weighed on her soul. Bitter memories came to the surface, and she began to tell her story. A long time ago, when you, Katie, were just born, my husband met me at the maternity hospital, Nanny said bitterly. He was so happy, so joyful, so full of hope, but everything changed very quickly. It was like he turned out to be someone I didn't know. When he found out you were born, he started celebrating with his friends. One day another, and then he just went on a bender, and suddenly our whole life was nothing but fear and violence. Alice listened with a shudder, realizing that this horror story was actually a chronicle of her real family. It was frightening to even imagine how much her mother had to endure. It was as if the weight of having children had changed him. He became more dangerous and tougher. He drank, beat me, disappeared nights unknown, where Valentina continued in a trembling voice. One day, in one of the worst moments, I grabbed a knife. It was all over. I don't remember how it happened, but I did it. I ended up being arrested and sent to jail. You went through such horrors, and it's all because of us, Alice whispered sadly. No, it had nothing to do with the girls. Valentina tried to calm herself. I lost my freedom, and you ended up in the little house, and then in the orphanage. All these years I searched for you, but the traces were lost. You ended up in a rich family, and Katie stayed poor. So I'm the bad mother, since I couldn't keep you from all those horrors. Alice hugged Valentina, trying to comfort her mother, who had experienced so much suffering and loss. I can't imagine how much suffering you've been through. But we're together now. It's all in the past, thank you. Alice, I hope nothing can ever keep us apart again. I'm sorry. I overheard you, came Katie's voice suddenly. She had been standing in the doorway all this time, leaning her shoulder against the jamb. Well, come to us quickly, then exclaimed Alice. The women gathered in the parlor to talk about what had happened. It was necessary to reveal the cards to the end, so that no more secrets should poison the life of their family. Katie looked very depressed, but was finally ready to tell her story too. I met my baby's father back in high school. We were classmates and started dating after graduation when he left for the army. I waited for him to come back. He came back. We got married. He became a trucker, and one day there was a terrible accident. He was gone. Katie, I can't even imagine what you've been through, Alice said bitterly. Yes, after he died, I lost the meaning of life, thought it was better to die. But my children, my little ones, they saved me from that terrible mistake. I realized that they were the only thing I had left in this world, and I did everything I could to protect them and give them a good future. Yes, you are very strong, but now we can take care of our loved ones together. Since fate has brought us together, I'm sure, Alice said, we'll be together and we'll be fine. Yes, Katie, we'll support you. You're not alone anymore. You have both your sister and your mom, and we'll do anything to help each other. Barbara hugged her daughter gently. Many tears were shed that day, but in the end, the family came together and a future filled with hope and love awaited them.